the Admiral of Hogwarts. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination, so don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like, and if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 76 Send Away Zaya along. That day, after returning to the castle, Veneto wrote a letter to Hood in front of Harry and the others. Watching Hathaway's white figure disappear into the sky, Harry suddenly seemed to think of something and asked, "By the way, when can we expect a reply? If nothing unexpected happens, tomorrow should be enough," Veneto said. "After all, this is just a letter from Hogwarts to London, and a whole day is enough for the Owls." Sure enough, Hugo and the others received a reply the next day. The content of the reply was the same as the decision Hugo and the others had discussed on the Admiral Network last night. In 2 days, someone would come to the school to take the dragon away, but why do they want us to give them the dragon at the edge of the Forbidden Forest at night? Harry asked with some confusion after reading the letter. "It will be very difficult for us to get out of the castle at that time, there's no way around it. My sister's friends, including my sister herself, are not Hogwarts students. So this castle will have some extra detection effects on them. In order to avoid being discovered, the people sent over can only stay as far away from the castle as possible." Veneto shrugged and said Hogwarts is a castle that has been built for 1,000 years, and the professors have cast a large number of protective spells on it day after day. For those who have never studied in this castle, it is easy to be discovered because they lack a certain aura belonging to the castle at least. If the ship girls were to approach the castle directly from the air and fly to the top of the astronomy tower, as in the original text, they would likely be discovered by the people in the castle. Therefore, for safety reasons, they finally decided to choose the edge of the Black Lake by the Forbidden Forest as the handover point because the location where the little dragon was being sent was completely different. The timing of this operation was also much earlier than in the original text. Therefore, Ron was not bitten by the little dragon while feeding it. And in exchange, in addition to being able to get 0.5 destiny points, Hugo also felt that he would likely have a large number of destiny points coming in next. In the original text, Ron went to the school hospital because he was bitten this time. Then, Malfoy used the excuse of borrowing a book from Ron to deceive Madame Pomfrey and enter the school hospital, and then he mocked him. As a result, when he left, Malfoy took the book from Ron's bedside, and Charlie's reply was in this book. And next, the news that Harry and the others were going to send away the dragon was known by Malfoy, and then Malfoy's late-night tracking and attempted accusation triggered a series of events. Hugo felt that if he could change this plot, he could lie there and watch a large number of destiny points come in. But what Hugo didn't know was that because the dragon was about to be sent away, Harry and Ron were in a state of excitement, so they were a little carried away when discussing it. As a result, when they were discussing it in the corridor, they didn't notice that Malfoy, who had been secretly monitoring them, was hiding in a corner of the corridor. Then, Malfoy, who was hiding in the shadows of the corner, heard the specific time to send away the dragon, but Harry and the others knew nothing about this because they hadn't discovered Malfoy. They were still preparing to send away the little dragon according to the original plan. Wednesday night was a dark and cloudy night, which was suitable for this kind of secret operation from a certain point of view. It was already a little late when Harry and Ron arrived at Hagrid's hut, because Peeves was playing tennis against the wall in the entrance hall, so they had to wait until he left. Veneto. Good evening. After entering the door, Harry and the others found that Hugo and Veneto were already waiting here. "By the way, didn't Hermione and Hugo come? You're a little late, Harry," Veneto said, glancing at Harry with her ruby-like eyes. As for Hermione and the others, of course they didn't come. After all, we're conducting a secret operation tonight. It's best if non-essential personnel don't come. This is not a party. It's not like the more people, the better. Hugo, of course, didn't come today, because he knew that Veneto alone was enough for this kind of thing, and adding himself would only have the opposite effect. However, in order to avoid some bad situations that might occur, Hugo also specially borrowed ginger from Hermione and gave it to Veneto along with his fish cakes, so that she could have an effective peripheral warning as a ship girl. Veneto had very carefully formulated a plan for this operation. According to the plan, Hagrid would stay in his hut and observe the direction of the castle because his size was too large and easily exposed. If someone really came out of the castle, he would be responsible for finding a way to lure that person away. Veneto herself was responsible for transporting the large crate containing the little dragon to the designated location. After all, the section of the road they needed to take this time was on the edge of the Forbidden Forest, basically equivalent to walking through the wilderness. In order to complete this task as soon as possible, the little dragon would be carried on Veneto's back. As for the reason why Veneto didn't stop Harry from coming, it was also very simple, because theoretically speaking, they shouldn't know that Harry's invisibility cloak existed. Therefore, Veneto could only know the existence of the invisibility cloak and borrow it temporarily. Hagrid had already put Norbert into a large crate and prepared everything when Veneto and Hugo came in. After Harry and the others entered the room, Hagrid might have realized that he was about to be separated from his beloved dragon son, so he started to ramble. "I've prepared a lot of mice for it, and some brandy, enough for it to eat along the way," Hagrid said in a muffled voice. "I also put its teddy bear in, so it doesn't feel lonely." There was a tearing sound from the crate, and Hugo felt that the teddy bear was likely to have been completely torn apart. "Goodbye, Norbert," Hagrid said, sobbing. "Mommy won't forget you." After Hagrid finished his final farewell, Veneto stepped forward, carried the box on her shoulder, and then signaled Harry to put the invisibility cloak on her. "Oh, what are we here for today?" Harry asked with a puzzled look after watching Veneto do this work all by herself. "The invisibility cloak you brought is very useful," Veneto said with a smile. "As for you two, you can choose one person to come with me to help me keep watch, and the other person can stay here with Hagrid and wait for news." In fact, Veneto didn't need anyone to keep watch, but at this time, she needed someone to help her witness the process of sending the little dragon away. She knew that neither Harry nor Hagrid were the kind of suspicious people, but sometimes showing others that you are upright and above board is also very important. After arranging everyone's tasks, Veneto and Harry set off. Fortunately, the moon was good tonight, so they only spent a few minutes to successfully reach the previously designated location. And at this time, a tall girl was already waiting here. After confirming with Veneto next to her that this person was the one who was coming to meet them, Harry lifted the invisibility cloak and appeared in front of her with Veneto. The girl first showed a slightly surprised expression, and then waved to Veneto and greeted her. "Good evening, Veneto. You should have brought the dragon, right?" Chapter 77 Accident. The one who came to the school to take little dragon away this time was the ship girl St. George, because she was the most knowledgeable about the fire dragon among all the ship girls and the group of subordinates newly recruited by the ship girls. Therefore, on the same day that Hugo issued the request, she directly accepted the task in the ship girl network, and then took a few hours train from London to reach the vicinity today, and then directly used the surrounding water network to enter the Black Lake, and finally came here. Of course we brought the dragon." After listening to St. George's question, Veneto handed the box to her and said, "Are you sure you can deal with this dragon? I remember the journey from here to Russia is not short. Don't worry, the selected manor this time is by the sea. It's not difficult for me to send this dragon over," St. George said, reaching out to grab the lid of the box. "By the way, let me take this dragon out. It's really inconvenient to carry the box, don't." After listening to the conversation between the two ship girls, Harry, who had been standing on the side as a background board, immediately widened his eyes, and then stretched out his hand trying to stop all of this. In the past few days, he had seen how Hagrid fought with a young dragon, so he was worried that the big sister in front of him, who he liked at first glance, would be scratched by Norbert. But his words stopped halfway, because he saw that the little dragon, who had been making a lot of noise before, suddenly became quiet, and then was directly grabbed by the tail by this beautiful big sister and hung on her shoulder. It looked no different from carrying an ordinary shoulder bag. "Don't worry, no one knows better than me how to deal with these dragons." St. George used her left hand to tuck the hair on her forehead behind her ear, and then smiled gently at Veneto and the others. "Okay, now I should go." After speaking, St. George took out a magic wand, bent down and knocked on her feet, pretending to cast some magic, and then walked away on the water. Watching her figure slowly disappear on the lake, Harry also breathed a long sigh of relief. After the two returned to Hagrid's hut and returned the box to Hagrid, Veneto and Harry said goodnight to each other in the hall and then separated. When Veneto returned to the common room, she found that Hugo and Hermione were not sleeping, but were sitting in the common room waiting for her. "How is the situation?" Hugo and the others pulled Veneto to a corner of the common room and asked. "Did you encounter anything unusual along the way?" "Everything went smoothly," Veneto made an okay gesture and looked at the two siblings and said, "If there are no accidents, Harry and the others should be able to go back smoothly. After all, they have the invisibility cloak, which is much safer than me along the way." After listening to Veneto's words, Hugo and Hermione breathed a sigh of relief together. Because if Harry's invisibility cloak can cover himself and Ron, it means that they cannot be discovered like in the original text, so they should not be caught by Filch like in the original text because it was already a bit late. The three of Hugo quickly said goodnight to each other and went back to their dormitories to sleep. Thinking that he might get a large amount of destiny points tomorrow, Hugo's heart was immediately filled with excitement, which caused him to spend a lot of time to fall asleep early the next morning. Hugo, who had gotten enough rest last night, woke up, and then went to the corridor with Veneto and Hermione for morning exercises. It was at this time that Victory's voice sounded again in Hugo's mind through the Admiral network. "Good news. You have now gained a point of destiny, 1 point." Hugo frowned after listening to Victory's report. Obviously, this number was far less than the amount he had estimated before, and he felt that something he didn't know must have happened here. "Yes, that's right, that's the number. I guarantee I've checked it several times." Sensing the question in Hugo's mind, Victory immediately replied, "I believe the system itself will not make any mistakes in this regard, so you'd better find a way to check it again." Since Victory had already said so, Hugo naturally didn't continue to pester him, but instead went with Veneto and the others for their morning exercises. Fortunately, doing some morning exercises at this time felt very good, dispelling the little bit of sleepiness that everyone had before, as well as the sense of anxiety that Hugo felt in his heart because of doubts. After finishing the morning exercises, the three of them returned to the dormitory feeling relaxed after a simple wash. They went to the auditorium for breakfast together. It was at this time that Hugo and the others discovered that in the huge hourglass recording the House Cup scores, the hourglass representing Gryffindor had a lot less rubies in it, leaving only a few scattered gems at the very bottom. And after entering the restaurant, the atmosphere around the Gryffindor table also seemed a bit abnormal. All of this showed that things seemed to have changed a bit. "Are you sure Harry and the others were wearing the invisibility cloak when they went back yesterday?" After seeing this scene, Hugo's first reaction was to ask Veneto through the Admiral network. "Why do I feel like the situation now seems to have gone back to the plot again? I swear I didn't see it wrong." Veneto also showed a puzzled look on her face. "After entering the hall, I specifically reminded them to put on the invisibility cloak, and then walked with them to the fork in the stairs on the second floor before separating. Theoretically speaking, they shouldn't have been discovered." Fortunately, during the meal, a message began to spread in the auditorium. The famous Potter and 2 stupid first-year students were caught wandering around at night yesterday, and then one person was deducted 50 points. This directly reduced the possibility of Gryffindor students winning the House Cup this year to 0. Although for Hugo, this was the plot returning to the original mainline, he and the ship girls were still very curious about how things turned out like this. So after eating breakfast, Hugo took Veneto and stopped Harry and the others, who looked depressed and listless. "How did you guys manage to get into this state?" After pulling Harry and Ron into an empty classroom, Veneto immediately asked, and then lowered her voice and said, "I remember when we separated yesterday, you were clearly wearing the invisibility cloak." "Yes, we were wearing the invisibility cloak," Harry said, "but the problem is that even with the invisibility cloak, the footprints we left behind could not disappear, and as a result, we were caught." "Footprints?" Veneto suddenly reacted. "Yesterday, everyone walked together from the open space in front of the castle, so it was inevitable that their feet would be covered with mud in those places, and naturally they would leave footprints on the ground. But at this time, she still felt something strange. When you went up to the second floor, most of the mud should have fallen off your feet, right? I don't think Filch's eyesight should be that good, but we ran into the professors," Ron said. At that time, Malfoy wanted to inform, but was caught by Professor McGonagall, and then Professor McGonagall took Malfoy to the office to deal with him, and happened to meet old Bat Snape, who was taking Neville to find him. Chapter 78 Forbidden Forest. "Neville?" Hugo asked, feigning ignorance. "I remember him being a boy in your house and the same year as us. He's a very honest person. Why was he out night wandering yesterday?" It's because of us." Harry and Ron both looked embarrassed. "Because he overheard Malfoy threatening to tell the professors about us, so he came to warn us. To be honest, he was actually implicated by us." That does sound like a sad state of affairs. Realizing that the discussion was starting to stray, Hugo quickly steered the conversation back on track. By the way, how exactly did Snape catch you? Because Malfoy was shouting and yelling that we were planning to smuggle a dragon out of the school. Ron looked somewhat bewildered as he said this. After hearing those words, Snape started looking at the ground. We thought we should go back quickly, so we tried to walk past them. We were being very quiet, but somehow Snape suddenly produced his wand and conjured a large amount of white powder in the air, and we were immediately exposed, Harry said. After thinking about it, we think it was probably because the mud on our shoes left footprints on the ground. It could also be footsteps. Think about how quiet the corridor was at the time. As long as you didn't talk, your footsteps should have been heard, Hugo said, talking nonsense. He thought it was likely because of the past grievances between Snape and Harry's father and his gang during their student days that Snape knew that the Potter family had an invisibility cloak. So after hearing Malfoy's words, he immediately took targeted measures. What you said is indeed possible. However, after hearing the reason Hugo made up, Harry and Ron nodded in agreement. Maybe if we had stood still, we wouldn't have been caught. In the following period, Harry and Ron's lives were obviously not easy. Not only did the Gryffindor students ignore them, but even the Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff students didn't give them a good look. Because everyone had been hoping to see Slytherin lose the House Cup in the beginning, people would point and whisper about Harry wherever he went, and they didn't lower their voices when saying insulting things to him. But after Hugo and the others, as well as Firefly, worked together to persuade several people who were doing this, at least this kind of open insult disappeared in Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. On the other hand, as the exam date approached, Harry had to bury himself in studying, which made him temporarily forget his troubles. He studied late into the night every day, trying to remember the complex potion recipes, the spells and charms, the dates of major magical inventions and goblin rebellions. For him, the only good news during this time was that he learned from Hugo and the others that the little dragon he had sent out had safely arrived at its destination and was now adapting to its new environment. This gave Harry a little comfort in his heart, at least proving that his adventure was still worthwhile. Because of the entire school's rejection, Harry could only come to the library with Ron and Neville to study. So naturally, he had more dealings with Hugo and the others recently. Fortunately, Ravenclaw had always adhered to a policy of non-interference, and Veneto had almost saved all the Ravenclaw students from the troll before, so although the Ravenclaw students were also unhappy with Harry, they didn't show any objection to Hugo and the others approaching Harry. Days passed like this, until one morning at breakfast, Harry, Ron, and Neville received notes. The 3 notes were exactly the same, and they read, "Your detention begins at 11 o'clock tonight. Find Mr. Filch in the entrance hall." Harry breathed a sigh of relief at this moment. Since losing so many points, he had been feeling guilty, so receiving Professor McGonagall's note at this time felt like a weight had been lifted. Because he knew that although he had done a good thing, he had indeed violated the school rules and caused great trouble to the house, so receiving this kind of punishment was a matter of course. Tonight is also an important time note in the original text. After seeing them receive the letter, Veneto asked Hugo through the Admiral network. "Should we participate in tonight's events? How do we solve the safety problem?" Hugo asked. He certainly knew that before he became an ancient god admiral, he was definitely no match for the ship girls in terms of combat power. Therefore, the ship girls were naturally the main force in battle. It was the same principle that the ship girls were the main force when facing the deep sea, not the admiral. So he naturally cared about the safety of the ship girls fighting on the front line. It shouldn't be too dangerous. "I judge that the guy with no nose is probably in very bad shape right now," Veneto said with great certainty. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been scared away by a centaur in the original text. "At least I think that as long as he has a little bit of combat power, he should be able to easily kill the centaur and then kill Harry." "You're right. If that's the case, then we can get involved in this matter." After hearing Veneto's judgment, Hugo immediately made his decision and said through the Admiral network, "But we'd better set off in advance, and we should also prepare well before setting off." When it was 11 o'clock at night, Harry, Ron, and Neville met in the Gryffindor common room. Then they went downstairs together to the entrance hall. Filch was already waiting there, along with Malfoy. Because Professor McGonagall was present that night, Malfoy was also punished for violating the curfew. Filch complained all the way about how Hogwarts didn't allow corporal punishment of students now, while constantly threatening Harry and the others. Fortunately, that road wasn't long, and Harry and the others quickly arrived at the door of Hagrid's hut and met him, then entered the dark Forbidden Forest with him. The Forbidden Forest at night was pitch black and silent. Various strange branches and leaves cast shadows on the ground under the starlight, looking like the claws of demons, but this didn't stop Hugo and the others. Just as Harry and the others followed Hagrid into the Forbidden Forest, Hugo and Veneto, who had gone ahead, had already met Firefly and ventured deep into the Forbidden Forest in order to avoid exposing themselves. Hugo and his party didn't turn on any lighting equipment. Fortunately, Veneto had radar, so she could detect the surrounding environment through the radar and then share the surrounding terrain with everyone in the network, guiding everyone to advance quickly and safely in the dark. Historically, Veneto was one of only 12 warships in the Italian Navy during World War II equipped with domestically produced radar. Unfortunately, due to technical problems, it could only be used for reconnaissance and not for directing naval guns. But for the ship girls, this problem has actually been successfully solved. Now Veneto and Firefly can deploy their ship equipment at any time and bombard suspicious targets under the guidance of radar. I think I seem to have found something. Not long after going deep into the Forbidden Forest, Firefly stopped Hugo and the others in the Admiral network and then pointed out a place. That should be the unicorn's bloodstains. Chapter 79 Unicorn. Upon hearing Firefly's reminder, Hugo and Veneto immediately stopped and looked in the direction she was pointing. As expected, under the moonlight filtering through the branches and leaves, some silvery blue metallic glints on the ground caught their eyes. Getting closer, Hugo discovered that these were patches of silver liquid. Besides a pool of blood about half the size of his palm, there were also 2 or 3 scattered drops nearby. It seemed that the injured unicorn might have wanted to rest here because of its severe injuries, but Voldemort had unexpectedly arrived in pursuit shortly after it stopped, so it had to continue fleeing. We'll chase in that direction. Having read many detective novels, Hugo quickly deduced the unicorn's escape route from the scattered, teardrop-shaped blood droplets, and then, together with the 2 ship girls, followed the direction the unicorn seemed to have fled. After advancing some distance in the direction the unicorn likely escaped, some broken branches and scattered hoof prints began to appear on the ground. Clearly, these traces indicated that they were on the right track. The unicorn didn't pass through here very long ago. After discovering these traces, Veneto knelt down to examine them. During World War II, naval officers from noble families often chose to serve on large warships, and Veneto was no exception. Therefore, she had also mastered many aristocratic skills, such as various etiquettes and hunting. So, in this situation, she could relatively accurately assess the unicorn's current condition. Can you be more precise? Hearing Veneto say this, Hugo asked with slight anxiety. Of course, it doesn't matter if you can't be precise. We're going to chase after it no matter what. The unicorn left here about 5 to 7 minutes ago. After carefully observing the pile of traces on the ground for a few seconds, Veneto said, I can tell that this unicorn is quite badly injured, but it can still hold on for a while. If there are no accidents, we should be able to save it before it dies. Speaking of which, Veneto paused slightly while staring at Hugo with her wine-red eyes. Actually, if you're willing to sacrifice a little, I think we should be able to find the injured unicorn sooner. Of course, this sacrifice won't harm you in any way, except for your image. Of course, I'm willing, of course, Hugo said. When it came to saving lives, he didn't mind making some sacrifices. Besides, if he could save this unicorn, he would definitely get a large amount of destiny points. A few minutes later, 2 black shadows, one large and one small, moved quickly through the Forbidden Forest. Hugo himself was now looking up helplessly at Firefly's small face, who was holding him in a princess carry. Obviously, in this situation, their speed was indeed much faster than before. I'm sorry, my dear Admiral brother, Firefly said to Hugo, lowering her head while tightly following Veneto's footsteps, running quickly through the Forbidden Forest and avoiding obstacles. I know this posture is indeed a bit awkward, but this way everyone can move faster. This was the optimal solution Veneto mentioned earlier. Although Hugo had indeed gained a physique comparable to a strong adult male through exercise after being strengthened, he was still not comparable to these ship girls in various aspects. Therefore, to save time, they simply had Firefly carry Hugo forward, while Veneto, as the main combat force, maintained her best state of readiness at all times. In fact, this was the best solution. The only problem was that being carried in a princess carry was a bit embarrassing for Hugo. Fortunately, there was no one around to see the scene in the Forbidden Forest at night. As the ship girls moved quickly, they soon followed the traces to a moss-covered tree stump. At this time, they heard the sound of gurgling water. Obviously, there was a stream somewhere nearby. On the winding path beside the stream, spots of unicorn blood were still scattered. The injured unicorn seems to be unable to run anymore, Veneto said after checking the blood on the ground again. Because the blood stains on the ground are becoming denser, which means the unicorn's speed has slowed down. But these blood stains are still fresh enough, so we still have hope of saving that unicorn. As Hugo and the others went deeper into the forbidden forest, the trees became denser. Even the path from just now began to become faint. Fortunately, Hugo and the others were fast enough, so after discovering a blood stain on a tree root, they were pleasantly surprised to find that no more than a minute had passed since this blood flowed from the unicorn's body. Sure enough, after the three of them bypassed the tangled branches of an ancient oak tree, they saw a clearing ahead. In the clearing, a unicorn that looked like an overly hairy white horse, with a spiral horn on its forehead, had already fallen to the ground, its slender legs stretched out unnaturally, looking as if it were already dead. It's still alive, Veneto said. Because this was a clearing, the moonlight could shine smoothly on this open space. With this faint light, Veneto, whose eyesight was far better than ordinary humans, saw that the chest of the unicorn lying there was still rising and falling slightly. If we want to rescue it, I think we have to be faster. Okay, put me down, Hugo said. Then he and the two ship girls walked to the side of the unicorn lying on the ground. Perhaps because this unicorn had been running away just now, Voldemort had not yet caught up, so they still had some valuable time to use for treatment because Veneto, the strongest fighter, needed to maintain a state of readiness. This kind of treatment activity was naturally done by Hugo and Firefly. What Hugo found a little strange was that, theoretically, adult unicorns would not allow men to approach, but this unicorn did not show any rejection of Hugo. I clearly didn't exchange for those female Admiral avatars. Seeing this scene, Hugo immediately felt a little blocked in his heart. Fortunately, Victory sensed Hugo's thoughts through the Admiral network at this time and explained the current situation to him. After you officially become an Admiral, you will slowly transform from a human to an ancient god Admiral. Victory's voice sounded in Hugo's mind. Therefore, it is very simple why this unicorn does not reject you. That is, unicorns reject humans, and you are no longer a pure human. I'm not human anymore. JPG. After hearing Victory's words, an emoji he had seen in his previous life immediately appeared in Hugo's mind. The only thing to be thankful for was that this change did not have strong side effects like the changes on Voldemort's body, so Hugo felt that he could accept this change. Good news, this unicorn mainly has external injuries, so the problem we face should not be too big, Firefly said after the examination. As a ship girl, she was better at treating this kind of external injury. However, what's a little strange is, since the other party is a dark wizard, why didn't he use a few dark magic spells? Chapter 80 Bombardment. It's not that he doesn't want to, but that he can't, Hugo said after a moment of thought, his hands not idle as he began pulling bottles of potions from his pouch. Considering his condition, I doubt he can cast much dark magic at all. Besides, unicorns themselves have a strong resistance to dark magic, so using it would be more trouble than it's worth. At this point, a lot of silver blood with a lot of foam began to appear at the unicorn's mouth, indicating that its lungs and internal organs had all been severely damaged, accompanied by a lot of internal bleeding. Fortunately, Firefly took out a large number of surgical tools from her ship's space and, together with the potions in Hugo's hand, finally stopped the unicorn's bleeding. Hugo had bought these potions before, because the Weasley twins were too easily injured during their experiments, so as their partner, Hugo simply bought some simple potions for treating wounds, things like Dittany. Even more fortunately, these wizarding potions could actually be used on magical creatures. For example, after pouring almost half a bottle of Dittany on the wound, the unicorn's blood actually stopped. I just temporarily dealt with a bleeding point in its body, Firefly said. I have to say, this kind of magical creature is much more tenacious than humans, and these potions are also very useful. I can basically confirm that it should be able to fully recover after a while. That's good, Hugo nodded with a smile. In any case, saving an innocent life is always a good thing, not to mention that if this unicorn can survive, he will definitely be able to obtain a lot of fate points. Careful. At this moment, Veneto suddenly warned Hugo through the Admiral network. At the same time, she and Firefly packed up everything they had brought and then pulled Hugo away from the clearing and into the jungle. A point is rapidly approaching here on the edge of my radar detection, Veneto explained in the Admiral network after entering the hidden jungle. That guy should be Voldemort. Then what are you going to do now? Hugo asked curiously. but I don't recommend close combat, because I'm worried that he may still retain the ability to cast the killing curse. Of course I won't fight him in close combat, because he's not a physical entity right now, Veneto said as she and Firefly deployed their ship. Okay, my Admiral, please cover your ears first. Although the next shot isn't as loud as our ship's guns firing after deployment, the sound isn't small. Understood. Hugo immediately took a few steps forward and knelt on the ground, covering his ears. Then, he listened to Veneto and Firefly's final preparations before firing in the Admiral network. Now, everyone, get ready. Target Voldemort, load semi-armor piercing rounds, all main guns, 1 round of fire, Veneto's voice echoed in the Admiral network. Firing target, direction. As a series of parameters were reported, Hugo saw the turrets on the 2 ship girls' ship gradually adjusting their direction. After Firefly finished adjusting and confirmed, Veneto immediately issued the order to fire. Boom! After a huge bang, 9 381mm shells and 4 120mm shells were fired simultaneously from the 2 ship girls' ship guns, and then exploded into a sea of fire a kilometer or 2 away. As ship girls, they can modify the shells according to their wishes when using artillery. For example, all of these semi-armor piercing shells were equipped with sensitive point detonating fuses, so they could explode directly the moment the shells landed. The reason for using semi-armor piercing rounds was also very simple. Voldemort was a little too close to them right now, and Veneto was worried that high explosive rounds might hurt themselves or innocent people. In fact, if Veneto hadn't confirmed that Harry and the others had appeared in another direction at this time, she would have preferred to use training rounds to see if she could smash Quirrell, who was possessed by Voldemort, to death with iron lumps. The target is still alive, but is running away in the opposite direction. A few seconds later, Veneto quickly obtained feedback from the vicinity of the shell's impact point through her radar detection. We weren't able to hit directly, but the target should still have been injured. Speaking of this, Veneto smiled and looked at Hugo. I feel great today. Firing these few shots makes me feel like my arms and legs are completely stretched out. By the way, let's get out of here quickly, or we'll be in trouble if we run into Hagrid and the others. After speaking, she had Firefly carry Hugo as she had done when they came, and then return to the castle as quickly as possible. Perhaps because the explosion in the Forbidden Forest caused enough commotion, the 3 of them successfully returned to the castle and went back to their respective common rooms without encountering any of the school's night patrols. Just a few minutes before they successfully returned to the castle, a body wrapped in tattered, charred black robes also floated into the castle and, avoiding the monitoring portraits and armor in the castle, entered the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office, then staggered to the cabinet, took out several bottles of things, and drank them all, then collapsed into a chair as if his whole body had completely lost its strength. No, I really don't know what happened just now. I don't think I can do it anymore, please. Quirrell's voice came from under the black robe, but soon, the voice turned into a. The wailing stopped after a few minutes, and then Quirrell sobbed and said, Okay. During the shelling, Voldemort sensed the danger when the shells were still flying in the sky. As a top wizard, even if he has fallen to this point, he still has some very powerful abilities. Not to mention that the shells of large caliber artillery made a huge noise like a train passing by when they flew through the air, so he forcibly took over Quirrell's body at the first moment, and then completely turned himself into a cloud of black mist and fled to other places. It's a pity that before he could run far, the shells landed and exploded. The destructive power of ship guns far exceeds ordinary people's imagination. Even the destroyer guns owned by Firefly are often jokingly called small water pipes, but the 120mm caliber can also be regarded as heavy artillery in the army. Not to mention the battleship main guns used by Veneto. According to naval regulations, the battleship's main guns even require the evacuation of personnel on the deck to avoid a muzzle blast when firing. And the power of the shell's explosion is far greater than this. More fatally, ship girls, as a product of some kind of mysticism, also contain some magical power in their attacks. Therefore, even if Voldemort was able to react in time, the flames and shock waves containing the power of destruction generated after the shells exploded still caused considerable damage to Voldemort in a gaseous state, and even forced him to return to his physical form immediately after escaping the explosion range. Chapter 81 Shelling Results. The moment Voldemort regained his physical form, he immediately had Quirrell lower his hood to survey their surroundings. To his astonishment, the stretch of the Forbidden Forest where they had been standing had vanished completely, replaced by a crater 7 or 8 meters deep and over 30 meters in diameter, filled with raging flames. The surrounding trees, ablaze like torches, created a scene reminiscent of hell. Clearly, after becoming ship girls, the Veneto sisters possessed far greater accuracy in their shooting than they did in their warship forms. This allowed them to concentrate all their shells within an extremely small area. Naturally, any target within their impact zone would suffer the most severe damage. Even Voldemort sustained considerable injuries under such circumstances. Although the explosions and flames didn't harm him too severely due to his timely use of appropriate magic, forcibly taking over Quirrell's body and casting spells in his current state still caused him significant damage. Seeing this, he decisively abandoned his pursuit of the unicorn and returned to the castle. Fortunately, he had used Quirrell's identity to purchase a good amount of raw materials from Nocturne Alley and concocted some potions. In addition, he had also drunk some of the unicorn's blood scattered around, so he managed to suppress the damage caused by the magical backlash and pull through. What was that just now? I don't remember a dragon being that powerful, do I? Voldemort thought with lingering fear after he had fully recovered and suppressed Quirrell. But no matter what, I should abandon the plan to hunt unicorns in the Forbidden Forest for now. This incident will definitely attract Dumbledore's attention, and going back to the Forbidden Forest would be too dangerous. Most importantly, my plan is about to succeed. While Voldemort was feeling paranoid because of the shelling, Hugo was overcome with excitement. Those few shells from tonight had earned him 3.5 destiny points in one go. More importantly, they had concealed themselves to the greatest extent possible during this operation. This was mainly because the ship girls could completely erase the remnants of their fired shells, leaving no traces except for the craters. Therefore, even if Dumbledore went to the scene to investigate later, he wouldn't be able to reconstruct what had happened. Gaining these destiny points was within expectations. At this moment, Hugo had finished washing up and was lying in bed, listening to Victory analyzing the events of the day through the Admiral network. From today's incident, I can confirm that the amount of destiny points you gain should be directly proportional to the extent of your meddling. For example, the Forbidden Forest incident was just a minor event in the original text, but because your actions significantly altered the plot, you gained so many destiny points. So, in the future, I should try to actively change the plot as much as possible, Hugo asked after hearing what Victory said. But I'm worried that some plot changes might cause things to develop in a worse direction. I must say that your understanding is somewhat biased, Victory said. Considering all factors, I think that selectively changing the plot is the best way to maximize benefits. Therefore, I personally suggest that you consult with us on this matter in non-emergency situations so that we can help you filter out the best solution as much as possible. The next day, Harry and the others vividly described what they had encountered in the Forbidden Forest the night before. According to him, there should have been a dragon passing through the Forbidden Forest last night, successfully driving away the being that was attacking the unicorn. However, because the dragon had set the Forbidden Forest on fire, they had some conflicts with the centaurs. Fortunately, Dumbledore arrived in time to quell the conflict because the ship girls had left very few traces. Even Dumbledore, the most powerful white wizard of the 20th century, failed to discover too many clues. In addition, the entire incident didn't cause too much damage. Therefore, this shelling incident was ultimately concluded as a dragon passing through. Harry's experiences did cause a small stir among the students, but it quickly subsided. Because for everyone, the end-of-year exams were the most important thing at this stage, and the dragon in the Forbidden Forest was just a minor episode. However, from a certain perspective, this incident was not a bad thing for Harry. At least, without facing Voldemort face-to-face, his exam preparation was less affected than in the original text, and he didn't experience any anxiety or headaches. It's just that because the Gryffindor students still didn't pay much attention to him due to the previous point deductions, he often went to the library with Ron to study with Hugo and the others. Hermione also showed some signs of being a teacher at this time, such as helping Harry and the others highlight key points and correct previous errors in their studies. But because the two sides were from different houses, both Hermione and Harry were careful to control their emotions. Therefore, the overall learning atmosphere was very good. Hugo was quite relaxed in his end-of-year exam review because his repeatedly strengthened body had greatly improved in all aspects, so he only needed to spend half or even a third of the effort of others to complete all the review tasks. But this didn't mean that he was much more relaxed than others during this time. Because the summer vacation was approaching, he and the two ship girls seized the time to record as much knowledge as possible from the school's library, the Room of Requirement, and Ravenclaw's own small library, preparing to conduct research during the summer vacation. It was also during this time that Hugo discovered the characteristics of these three places of concentrated knowledge. The school library contained the most complete knowledge, but unless one was willing to risk screening books in the restricted section, one could basically not obtain much advanced knowledge. The Ravenclaw library mainly recorded some unpopular information and various ideas, which were not systematic as a whole. From a certain point of view, the information stored in this library was very valuable, and it could open up new ideas and solve certain problems for everyone. But on the other hand, these materials, mostly from ideas, required a relatively long research time to be perfected to a usable state, and basically could not be used to improve strength in a short period of time. The books in the Room of Requirement were the most chaotic in content. Some of them contained some extremely valuable knowledge that could not be found elsewhere, but most of them were dirty and repetitive textbooks, some books that were only suitable for reading alone in private occasions, or some notebooks where people recorded their thoughts or useless information, and their biggest gain in this search came from the Room of Requirement. They found an ancient notebook inside, which recorded knowledge about how to use the killing curse. After obtaining this knowledge, they uploaded the knowledge in the book to the Admiral network as soon as possible, and then directly destroyed the notebook. As time passed, the weather began to slowly become hot. Although staying in an ancient castle in the Scottish Highlands was obviously much cooler than Hugo's previous life, for most students, facing the exams, they could feel the inner fire and outer fire intertwined, making them extremely irritable. But no matter what everyone thought, time still passed day by day. Finally, the day of the exam arrived. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 82 Final Exam. The end-of-year exams at Hogwarts were held during the hottest time of the year, and the large classroom where so many students were taking the exams was incredibly stuffy due to the large number of people and the small space. Fortunately, Hugo's body had been strengthened, so he was only slightly damp on his forehead, and his exam state wasn't affected. Just like the college entrance exam in his previous life, all the paper and pens for the Hogwarts end-of-year exams were handed out directly to each examinee in the examination hall, and they had all been enchanted with anti-cheating spells. But for Hugo, these didn't affect anything, because he had already firmly memorized the knowledge contained in the vast majority of the curriculum. As for the small portion of forgotten knowledge points, he could obtain them through the Admiral network without being discovered. After the written test of each subject, there would be a practical magic exam. After all, for wizards, no matter how proficient you are in theory, it's far less important than actually casting magic. Depending on the course, each teacher had different exam content. For example, Professor Flitwick asked them to walk into the classroom one by one to see if they could make a pineapple tap dance across a desk. When it was Hugo's turn, he easily made the pineapple twist and bounce across the desk at the same frequency, which naturally earned the praise of head of house. Professor Flitwick and Professor McGonagall watched them turn a mouse into a snuff box. The more exquisite the box, the higher the score. If the box still had the mouse's whiskers, points would be deducted. Hugo performed normally during the exam, smoothly turning the mouse in front of him into an exquisite enamel snuff box inlaid with the Venato's ship emblem, just like he had practiced before in the dungeon-like potions classroom. Hugo properly brewed the forgetfulness potion. Fortunately, Harry completely diverted Snape's attention. Otherwise, being stared at by the professor from behind would be enough to scare up problems. Even if there weren't any, Harry's mood seemed a bit bad these few days, looking like he had pre-exam jitters like Neville. But everyone else was fine, because everyone had reviewed comprehensively and seriously before. So Hugo thought that the people who reviewed with him should do well in the final exams. The History of Magic exam was the only exam that was only a written test. Whether it was because of this reason or because Professor Binns was a ghost, the questions were obviously lacking in logic. Some questions that seemed overly simple and very obscure exam questions were completely mixed together, making people feel a bit strange when answering them. For example, the last essay question on the paper asked students to answer the names of the 4 wizards who founded Hogwarts and the reasons for establishing the school, which could be said to be a pure giveaway question. But the next question immediately jumped to the obviously obscure question of who invented this self-stirring cauldron. The knowledge points that Hugo needed to seek help from the Admiral network during the final exams were basically concentrated in the history of magic. Because as a ghost, Professor Bin's hypnotic ability was too strong, and this hypnosis wasn't just because the course was boring, it probably also contained some kind of ability unique to ghosts. So that Hugo himself had never fully listened to any history of magic lesson. Even this kind of hypnosis had a certain effect on the ship girls, so that Veneto or Firefly needed Hugo to issue orders to them through the Admiral network before each class to ensure that they listened attentively to each lesson. When Professor Binns told them to put down their feather quills enchanted with anti-cheating spells and roll up the parchment they had answered on, a huge cheer rang out in the classroom. They had finally completed all the exams, they were free, and before all the exam results were announced, everyone could relax and have fun for a whole week. Hugo was also infected by this atmosphere, so when everyone walked out of the examination hall, he also had a smile on his face and walked out of the classroom with the others. It was much easier than I originally thought, Hermione said when they came to the sunny grounds outside with the crowd. I really didn't need to memorize the Werewolf Code of Conduct of 1637 and the course of the Goblin Rebellions. I roughly guessed this when I was reviewing, but you didn't believe what I said. Hugo showed an I knew it all along expression and said, those few events involve complex historical and political games, and even today they still affect the distribution of various forces in the magic world, so this kind of complex question will not be used to test us first-year students. Okay, I think you might be right. Hermione shook her head gently after hearing Hugo's words, and then habitually began to review the exam content, talking endlessly about the questions she had just done and how to answer them. It was no different from what they did after exams in elementary school. Sis, once is enough for exams, there's no need to do it again, soon, Hugo said to Hermione with a depressed expression. Although post-exam review can be said to be Hermione's traditional skill, it doesn't mean that Hugo can get used to his older sister's way of doing things. Soon, he calmed Hermione down by repeatedly reminding her, just like before. Then the three of them slowly walked down a gentle slope and sat under a tree by the lake with a plop. Over there, a giant squid was lying in the warm shallow water sunbathing, and the Weasley twins and Lee Jordan were gently fiddling with its tentacles. We have enough time for a week to do our own things, such as spending the whole day in the library except for meals, Veneto said, resting her hands behind her head and leaning against a tree. Oh, right. Wednesday might not work. Because that's the Quidditch final, it's us against Gryffindor. Just as the three of them began to imagine how to arrange their completely own time in the coming week, Harry and Ron suddenly ran towards them. After the two of them ran closer, Hugo found that Harry's face looked a bit ugly. What's wrong, Harry? Hugo said after Harry and Ron stood beside him. The exams are over now, why is your face still so ugly? I think you should bask in the sun by the lake and relax. Thank you for your concern, Hugo. But my problem has nothing to do with the exams. Harry first thanked Hugo for his greeting, and then said with a frown, my scar has been hurting. It has hurt before, but never as frequently as it is now. So I wanted to ask you guys what you think about this matter, because everyone had been reviewing together recently. Hugo and his group had naturally become familiar with Harry. So when encountering this kind of thing, Harry, out of some insistence, didn't want to ask the professors and naturally ran to ask Hugo and them. After all, everyone recognized that Ravenclaw students were all smart people. Go see Madame Pomfrey, Veneto offered a safe suggestion. If you're not feeling well, I think seeing a healer is a good idea. I'm not sick, Harry said. I think this is a warning, meaning danger is coming, but Professor Dumbledore is there, and Hagrid wouldn't betray Professor Dumbledore, and no one can get past Fluffy's guard, so you don't need to worry. Your scar might be hurting because you're too nervous, Hermione persuaded. I think this might be because of the exams before. For example, I woke up last night, busy reviewing my transfiguration notes, and then suddenly remembered that we already took that exam. Listening to Hugo and their remarks, Harry stood there without saying a word, as if thinking about something. Suddenly, he turned around and ran towards the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Hugo and the others were a little worried about Harry's state, and followed him towards that direction. Chapter 83 Question. What on earth did you think of that made you so nervous all of a sudden? Because of multiple body enhancements and recent exercise, Hugo quickly caught up with Harry, who was running in the front, and asked, because what your sister said just now reminded me of something, Harry said while running. Although according to what you asked Hagrid before, We know that it is not too strange for a peddler selling dragon eggs to appear in the Hogshead bar, and it is normal to gamble while playing cards, but it seems a bit too coincidental that all of these are put together. Just like Hermione said just now, Hagrid is indeed unlikely to betray Headmaster Dumbledore. But he is not a very tight-lipped person either, so I think that peddler who might have a problem may have gotten some important information from Hagrid's mouth, such as how to get past a three-headed dog. What you said is indeed possible, Hugo responded immediately after hearing Harry's words. It was not surprising that Harry could think of this. After all, he was not a particularly stupid student, and this time he lacked a smart brain like Hermione by his side. So he seemed to be more comprehensive in his thinking than in the original text. Soon, the group crossed the grass and arrived at Hagrid's hut on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid was sitting on a chair outside the hut, his trouser legs rolled up high, busy shelling pea pods into a large bowl. After seeing Hugo and the others, he waved to them enthusiastically and said, "Hello, I remember the exam should be over now, right? Would you like a cup of hot tea?" "Thank you, but we have some urgent matters to ask you about." Harry declined Hagrid's kindness, and then asked about some details of what happened when Hagrid was playing cards that day. As a result, in just a few words, Harry very smoothly obtained everything that happened when Hagrid was playing cards, and also figured out how to safely pass the three-headed dog. "It's just as I thought." After inquiring about the information he needed, Hugo and the others ran towards the castle together. After the group entered the somewhat cold foyer, Harry gasped for a few breaths and said to the people present, "Hagrid really leaked important secrets. We must find the headmaster and tell him about this." But everything that followed did not go so smoothly. The group prepared to go to the headmaster's office, but Professor McGonagall told them that the headmaster had already left the school. Obviously, Dumbledore's departure at this time was likely related to the thief who was planning to steal the Philosopher's Stone. And Ron, who was preparing to go to the teacher's lounge to keep an eye on suspicious people, was driven back by Snape because of his poor acting skills under such circumstances. Harry decided to take a gamble and act tonight, trying to take the Philosopher's Stone away before the thief who was planning to steal it succeeded. To prevent the Philosopher's Stone from falling into the hands of evildoers after Harry said his decision, Hugo and the others also expressed that they would participate in this action. Then, the group agreed on the time and place to meet tonight and dispersed to return to prepare. "Sister, I don't think you should participate in this action tonight," Hugo said to Hermione when returning to the Ravenclaw Tower. "I think it's enough for Venuto to go with Harry and the others through the door. What about us? You clearly promised Harry and the others just now that you would participate in their action tonight," Hermione asked with wide eyes. "Are we going to break our promise tonight?" "Of course not. I just said I wouldn't go through that door, but I didn't say I wouldn't participate in this action," Hugo immediately denied after hearing Hermione say this. After all, although the two were twins, Hermione was indeed born more than 10 minutes earlier than him. And as an older sister, Hermione always seemed to be more assertive when the two were together. Therefore, Hugo realized that if he couldn't convince Hermione, there would definitely be a lot of trouble later. "Okay, tell me your specific arrangements and let me listen." Because the students were all starting to enjoy the leisurely time after the final exam, there was no one in the corridor. So Hermione simply stopped and looked at Hugo with her arms crossed. "I hope you can come up with a reason that can convince me, because this action requires a few careful people to watch everyone's back." Hugo stared directly into Hermione's eyes and said seriously, "Harry's idea is indeed not too bad, especially when the professors are now unwilling to believe what we say. This may be the only feasible solution. But I am worried that someone may follow us through those levels and then steal the Philosopher's Stone at the last moment. Therefore, I hope that you can come with me to guard outside the door at that location to confirm that there are indeed no followers behind Harry and the others, and avoid the tragedy of us being used by thieves." "That's right, your idea is very reasonable. It is indeed necessary to have someone watch everyone's back and be ready to notify the professors at any time." Hermione nodded after hearing Hugo's words, indicating that she agreed with his arrangements in this matter, and then said, "But I think one person is enough for this job. For example, you should be able to complete this job easily, so why mobilize two people? Because we must not only ensure the safety of Harry and the others, but also ensure the safety of the sentry outside," Hugo said very seriously. "If it's just one person, it's easy for various problems to occur, such as not being able to leave when a warning needs to be issued, or being harmed by the dark wizard who is preparing to steal the Philosopher's Stone. But if there are two people on guard, these problems can basically be avoided." If you put it that way, I think what you said is right. I decided to stay outside with you tonight. After the training some time ago, Hermione also fully realized her shortcomings in some aspects, so after thinking about it, she finally agreed to this plan. Hearing Hermione's agreement, Hugo breathed a sigh of relief. He had been preparing for the most important activity of the final exam tonight for a long time and had formulated a special plan through discussions with the ship girls. And reassigning manpower was the first step in this big event, and fortunately, he finally successfully persuaded Hermione to allow the plan to proceed smoothly. Besides, the plot now is already far from the original plot. Hugo was a little worried that his older sister might be hurt in this action, so naturally he didn't want Hermione to go down with Harry and the others this time. After the group discussed the specific actions for the evening, they returned to the common room together. In the following time, Hugo and the others went to the library to read books as usual, then had dinner together and returned to Ravenclaw Tower. Tried to relax as much as possible during this time until the agreed time arrived. The three of them left the common room together and walked towards the corridor on the 4th floor. Before leaving, Hugo and Hermione each brought their own cats. Chapter 84 Midnight. Ginger and Fish Cake are just too clever. Sometimes I even suspect they aren't cats at all, but some kind of magical creature that just looks like cats, Hermione murmured, watching Fish Cake silently dash past her. Just now, Ginger had detected Peeves the poltergeist ahead of time, allowing them to avoid him by taking another route. Actually, Hermione had noticed that Ginger was different from other cats in the first month of having him. The cat basically didn't need anyone to worry about him, eating at fixed times and locations, and using the litter box at fixed times and locations. He even seemed to understand human emotions, appearing by her side and acting cute whenever she needed him. Later, Hermione even found that she could give her cat some commands, tasking them with simple missions, just like well-trained hunting dogs. At first, she found it a bit strange, but after learning from several pure-blood wizard classmates that there were many creatures in the magical world that looked like cats and could produce offspring with cats that were similar to ordinary cats, she stopped worrying about her pets. She even learned to have Ginger help her in daily life. For example, when she occasionally went out for nighttime strolls to read, she would bring Ginger along to keep watch, or when using the bathroom to take a shower, she would have the cat watch out for any activity outside. And naturally, Hermione wouldn't forget to bring her cat along on this night's outing. You're right, Hugo said after hearing his sister's remark. They are very clever little darlings. With their help, even if we don't have an invisibility cloak like Harry, we can still move freely around the castle after curfew and be sure not to get caught. And so, the three of them smoothly arrived at the intersection of the corridor they had agreed upon earlier, and then carefully examined the pillar to the left of the corridor entrance. After the examination, they found that the pillar was bare, with no patterns at all, which meant that Harry hadn't arrived yet. To avoid being discovered, they followed their prior agreement and used a pen to draw a symbol on the pillar at the corridor entrance, then hid in an empty classroom not far away, observing the corridor entrance through the crack in the door. I think I hear some music, Hermione said suddenly after the two of them had hidden. And after she pointed it out, Hugo also faintly heard the sound of a harp in the quiet corridor. Clearly, Voldemort had arrived earlier than them tonight, and had already entered that door and used music to lull the three-headed dog to sleep. Indeed, it's music. I think it's possible that, Hugo began to say at this moment, but he was immediately stopped by Veneto. Quiet, I think I hear footsteps approaching here. Ship girls have much stronger senses than humans, so Hugo and the others immediately stared intently in the direction Veneto indicated. Sure enough, only a few tens of seconds later, they heard footsteps coming from the empty corridor, followed by Harry's voice, which, although suppressed very low, was still clearly audible after being amplified by the empty corridor. Late at night, Snape has successfully passed Fluffy. I won't blame you if you want to back out now. At this moment, the footsteps stopped in front of the pillar at the corridor entrance, and then the invisibility cloak was removed from Harry's body. Not just you, Ron. Hermione and the others as well. This isn't your responsibility. Is it only you who are allowed to be a hero here? Veneto said at this moment, poking half of her body out of the empty classroom and waving. The fact that we came here at this time means that we have already made our choice, so don't say such silly things. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to see you all here. After Harry and Ron entered the empty classroom, Harry scanned each of their faces and smiled. During their previous exchanges, Harry had fully understood Hugo and the other's strength, so seeing them again at this time naturally made him relax a lot. The group exchanged glances and were about to cross that door when Hermione stopped everyone, and then simply stated Hugo's previous concerns and the plan to have her and Hugo keep watch outside. Indeed, you Ravenclaw students think things through much more thoroughly than we do. After listening to Hermione's words, Harry nodded in agreement. Trying to break through the defenses set up by all the professors in the school certainly won't be easy, so it's very possible that a thief is following us. But won't the two of you be in too much danger facing Snape? At least we can guarantee to raise the alarm in time, Hugo said with a smile. There are so many professors and students in the castle, so as long as we raise the alarm, the thief will definitely run away. After a brief exchange, everyone immediately split into two groups. Harry, Ron, and Veneto, wearing the invisibility cloak, entered the room, while Hugo and Hermione continued to stay in that room to watch their backs, and prepared to notify the professors at any time if the situation was not right. After saying goodbye to each other, Veneto pushed open the door with Harry and the others. With the creaking sound of the door opening, they immediately heard a low growl in their ears. Although the big dog couldn't see them, all three of its noses were frantically twitching and sniffing in their direction. It seems someone has been here before us, Veneto said, because she saw a harp at the feet of the three-headed dog, but the harp that was just playing had now stopped, leaving the room in silence. So after she finished speaking, she immediately took out a harmonica from her bosom and began to play. As the first note was played, the big dog's eyes began to droop. After only playing a short piece of music, the big dog slowly stopped growling, then its knees went weak and it fell to the ground, asleep. Seeing this, Veneto continued to play the harmonica while walking forward with Harry and the others. When they came to the feet of the three-headed dog, they could even feel the big dog's warm, stinky breath. This seems to be a very deep shaft, Ron said after opening the trapdoor upwards. It looks like it's several stories high, and there are no ladders around. How are we supposed to get down now? Let me try first, Harry said at this moment, and then slowly slid down along the edge of the hole, finally holding on to the edge of the hole with only his 10 fingers. He looked up at Ron and said, "If something happens to me, don't follow me down. Go straight to the Owlery and send Hedwig to Dumbledore with a letter, okay? Wait, this is really..." Before Ron could say anything, Harry let go, and a few seconds later, the sound of soft objects colliding came from below, followed by Harry's voice from below. "It's okay. It's a soft landing, you can jump." Hearing Harry say this, Ron jumped down second, and then Veneto stuffed the harmonica into her bosom and jumped down last. As she jumped down, the big dog woke up again and put its mouth to the entrance of the cellar, barking wildly, but unfortunately, everyone had already successfully passed this first hurdle. Chapter 85. Grab the keys. What in the world is this? Ron was the second to fall, landing rather inelegantly on all fours. Because of this, he clearly felt something soft cushioning his fall. "I don't know, it feels like some kind of plant. Probably placed here to cushion the impact of the fall," Harry said. At the same time, they heard another thud nearby, indicating that Veneto had also fallen. There aren't many wizards who can fly without any support, so if this place is designed like this, there must be some safety measures in place. This is not a safety measure at all. "I really don't understand why there's such a large patch of devil's snare here," Veneto exclaimed before Harry could finish his sentence. "Oh, moving tentacles, this is just awful." As she spoke, she struggled towards a damp wall, while the vines on the ground kept trying to wrap around her ankles. However, because she was prepared and possessed considerable strength, she quickly broke free and stood outside the devil's snare's reach. But Harry and Ron weren't so lucky this time. Because they were a bit slow to react, their legs were already entangled by the vines, making it impossible for them to move. "Didn't you guys pay attention in class?" Veneto sighed, drew her wand, and quietly muttered a spell. Soon, a series of bluebell-like flames erupted from the tip of her wand, and the vines on the ground quickly retreated, avoiding the light and warmth naturally. The vines that had been Harry and Ron also retreated, allowing the two boys to escape from the tangled mess. Seeing that everything was safe, Veneto immediately started to nag. "This stuff is devil's snare. It wraps around and kills those who fall on it. But its weakness is light and heat." Sprout emphasized this repeatedly in class. "How could you not remember?" Amid Veneto's nagging, they started to walk along the only corridor in the area. Knowing they were in the wrong, Harry and Ron remained silent, except for Ron mumbling something along the lines of "maybe only Ravenclaw students remember every word the professors say." However, Venato's nagging was much milder than Hermione's, so she stopped quickly. At this point, besides their own footsteps, the only sound in the corridor was the slow dripping of water droplets down the walls. "Can you hear anything?" Ron suddenly asked after they had walked a short distance further. "I think I hear rustling and tinkling sounds ahead, like the rapid flapping of insect wings." "I hear it too," Venato said. "And I see some light ahead. I think if we go forward, we should know what's there." With that, she quickened her pace, and the two boys could only exchange a glance and jog to catch up. Soon, they reached the end of the corridor, where a brightly lit room lay before them, with a high, arched ceiling. Countless small birds, as dazzling as jewels, fluttered around the room. "I think I know what was making that noise. It's keys." Although she knew the plot, in order to avoid the butterfly effect, she still raised her head to look after entering this room. As a ship girl whose eyesight, especially dynamic vision, is better than ordinary humans, she quickly saw that these things were keys with wings, and even found the silver key with drooping wings at a glance. "So, to open the wooden door on the other side, we have to find the right key from that pile and catch it," Harry said, scanning the room. He quickly found the flying brooms in the corner. "It seems the designer of this challenge is being quite obvious. In that case, what are we waiting for?" Venato said, striding to the corner, picking up a broom, and kicking off the ground, soaring into the air. Then, she charged into the dense array of keys. Seeing this, Harry and Ron also grabbed the other two brooms and flew up because she had already observed the key's location. Venato steered the broom straight towards the large silver key as soon as she took off. Although she wasn't particularly skilled at flying compared to those aircraft carrier ship girls, her extremely strong physique still gave her a considerable advantage in this area, so, only 30 seconds after taking off, she successfully forced the silver key with blue wings to fly to the wall. But at that moment, she analyzed from the known situation that these keys were too maneuverable. If she flew over in such a step-by-step manner, the key might have already escaped. "Don't even think about running." After reaching a conclusion, Venato shouted loudly and pressed down on the broom, leaping off and pinning the key, which didn't have time to dodge, against the stone wall, making a harsh metallic clanging sound. Venato, Harry and Ron, who were following behind, cried out in alarm at the sight. After all, although this place wasn't very high, it was still 2 or 3 stories tall. Falling from this height would almost certainly result in serious injuries. "Don't worry, I'm fine," Venato shouted after hearing the exclamations behind her. At this time, Harry and Ron could see through the swarm of keys flying in the air that Venato was holding a large silver key in one hand, and the other hand was hooked onto a groove in the stone wall, hanging there, not falling as they had imagined. "You should know that I'm very strong, so you shouldn't worry about this," Venato said, using the uneven surfaces of the stone wall as leverage, and quickly returned to the ground. At the same time, Harry and Ron also landed. "That was so cool," Ron whispered after getting off the broom. After discovering that Venato was fine, he and Harry immediately developed a sense of awe towards Venato from the bottom of their hearts. "I'm not quite the same as normal people, so don't try to imitate me," Venato said, walking to the door and inserting the struggling large key into the keyhole, twisting it forcefully. With a click, the lock sprang open, and the key flew away again. It had been caught twice in a row and looked haggard. "Let me see what the next challenge is," Venato said, pushing open the door. The second room was pitch black, and nothing could be seen. But as soon as they stepped inside, the room suddenly lit up, illuminating a shocking scene. They were standing beside a giant chessboard, with black pieces in front of them, all taller than themselves, seemingly carved from black stone or something similar. On the other side of the room, facing them, were some white pieces. "It seems the next challenge should be chess," Venato said, after seeing the situation on the field. Chapter 86 Temporary Call. "Are you ready?" Venato asked, turning her head after confirming their current situation. However, before her voice faded, a slightly helpless expression appeared on her face because she discovered that the two gentlemen present were trembling non-stop. "Don't worry, we're ready," Harry and Ron said. As expected of representatives of Gryffindor students known for their bravery, Harry and Ron quickly recovered from the shock of seeing those giant chess pieces without facial features. Then, they adjusted their condition and prepared to meet the next test. "I think we have to act as chess pieces," Ron said after looking at them. Then, he began to arrange things for his two companions. Although Venato's chess skills were not low, considering that she couldn't hog the limelight alone in this adventure, she gave Ron the chance to show his face. At this time Ron was indeed good at playing magic chess, But when the chess game ended, he still faced the moment of self-sacrifices in the original text. Just after he persuaded Harry and Ron to take a step forward, the White Queen immediately pounced over and raised her stone arm high at him. Hopefully it will be light. After seeing the White Queen pounce at him, Ron closed his eyes in fear and waited for the final blow, but the pain and damage caused by the imagined fierce blow did not come. After waiting for a few seconds, he slowly opened his eyes and saw that the chess piece remained motionless in the previous ready-to-strike position, looking almost like an ordinary statue. "All right, Mr. Weasley, I think you can put your hands down," Professor McGonagall's voice suddenly rang in their ears. Ron slowly turned his head and saw Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick standing on the edge of the chessboard, both holding their wands. McGonagall, Professor," Ron said with a slight tremor. Among the many professors in the school, Snape and McGonagall were the people he feared the most. Especially now that he was caught red-handed for violating school rules, he was very worried about being punished. "Okay, get off the chessboard," Professor McGonagall said calmly, without flying into a rage. "I have learned the cause and effect of this incident from the Granger siblings. I admit that I was indeed a little negligent in this matter, but what you did was too reckless. You won't expel us, will you?" Harry asked, looking at Professor McGonagall at this time. After seeing the two professors, he immediately felt relieved, which meant that it was impossible for anyone to steal the Philosopher's Stone. But soon he thought of something and asked in a trembling tone like Ron. "We know we shouldn't, Mr. Potter, although I don't agree with your behavior, this time it can be considered justified, so I won't punish you for it," Professor McGonagall said. "The next task belongs to us professors. You should now return to the maze exit with your companions. I think the Grangers are waiting for you there." After speaking, Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick walked together towards the next door, while Harry and the others went in the opposite direction and returned to the hall full of keys, and then followed the corridor all the way to the place with the devil's snare. Just now when Harry arrived here, he looked around foolishly, hoping to see something like a staircase that would allow him to go upstairs, but after looking around carefully, he only saw bare walls. Just when he didn't know what to do next, light suddenly appeared from the wall covered with devil's snare vines, and then the devil's snare on the wall receded with a rustling sound, revealing a small room hidden on the side of the wall. "Harry, come in quickly." A second or two later, Hugo shouted to Harry and the others, holding a glowing wand. "We need to wait here for a while now, wait for the two professors to finish dealing with the things inside and reunite with us, and then take us to the castle." "Hugo." Harry opened his eyes wide in surprise after seeing Hugo, and then, following Hugo's instructions, he and the other two companions walked into the room he was in. As soon as he entered the room, he was surprised to find that the room was actually 20 or 30 meters big. It was a square-shaped small living room with a washroom. In the center of the living room was a round table, surrounded by a large pile of soft objects. Hermione was now sitting on the cushion by the round table, pouring tea for everyone. "I remember you should be on guard up there. Why are you here now?" Ron asked, widening his eyes and looking around the room in shock, then looking at Hermione. "And what's going on with Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick just now? I remember we went to Professor McGonagall during the day, but she obviously didn't trust what we said at that time. Why did she come now?" Don't worry. Hugo knocked on a brick on the wall at this time, causing the exit just now to return to a wall with only a one-way transparent observation port the size of a human face, then walked back and said to Harry and Ron, who kept throwing out their questions. "It just so happens that we have time now, so I think I can tell you what just happened. After you listen, you will know the answers to all the questions you are asking now." After speaking, Hugo motioned for everyone to sit around the round table. After everyone was seated and picked up their teacups to drink, he began to talk about what he and his sister Hermione had just encountered. After the two separated, Hugo and Hermione began to observe everything in the corridor through the crack in the door. Hogwarts at night was so quiet that Hugo could even hear his own breathing. After lying stiffly by the door for a few minutes, he suddenly got up and walked to another door and reached out to pat Hermione on the shoulder. "What's the matter, Hugo?" Hermione asked, keeping her voice down while observing the situation outside. "I think we should be seriously watching the corridor now to make sure that the thief didn't follow behind Harry and the others. At least based on the current situation, I think it is unlikely that someone is following them anymore," Hugo said in a low voice as well. "If they were tracking, the other party would have to be closer to Harry and the others. You need to know that many traps in the magic world can be restored. If the distance is too far, It is likely to cause the thieves' plan to use Harry and the others to destroy the trap to completely fail. Phew. Hearing Hugo say this, Hermione relaxed a lot at once, then frowned and asked, "Then what do we do next? Just wait here for Harry to come out?" No, of course not." Hugo shook his head and said, "I suddenly thought that we now have a very good excuse to ask the professors for help." Chapter 87 Find a Professor. What? Hermione's eyes widened in confusion at Hugo's suggestion to find the professors. "But we went to find those professors this afternoon, and they all believed everything was under control and didn't think our warning was real. Do you have a way to convince them now?" "Of course. I didn't have an excuse to get the professors to come, but now I do," Hugo said, shrugging. "You see the harp that's been placed there? Doesn't that explain the problem?" "Yes." Hermione suddenly realized what Hugo meant, then turned to look at him and asked, "But Harry and the others have already gone down. Why didn't you say so earlier?" "I just didn't think of it earlier, but I don't think it's too late to do this now. After all, the obstacles set by the headmaster shouldn't be easy to overcome. We still have time." As he spoke, Hugo pulled Hermione towards the charms classroom. With the two cats running ahead of them, he had another reason he didn't mention, which was that he had learned from Veneto that Harry had successfully entered and delved into the treasure location, and that was enough to get the professors to go in and find him. In fact, all of this was in Hugo's plan. At least he felt it was too dangerous for Harry to face Quirrell and Voldemort like in the original story. Especially when the mental state of that combination was completely unstable. What if the butterfly effect caused Quirrell to directly pull out a knife and stab Harry to death? Although Hugo might be able to get a large amount of fate points, it would completely lose his important prophetic advantage. According to the ship girl's previous analysis, certain major changes to the plot at this stage are very likely to become obviously not worth the loss as the plot develops. On the other hand, calling the professors to join the challenge should also be considered a huge change. At least it shouldn't be too small in terms of fate points, which is a good choice from Hugo's personal perspective. More importantly, he still has the mentality of an ordinary person, and he can't bring himself to watch Harry die with such decisiveness. This is also why he let Veneto go down the trapdoor with Harry and the others. In addition to being able to try different ways to clear the level and obtain more fate points, as well as monitoring Harry's movements in real time to facilitate Hugo's decision-making, providing protection for Harry is also an important reason. At least with Voldemort's current state, it is not too difficult for Veneto to save everyone's lives in front of him. We'll split up in a bit. You go to Professor McGonagall's office in the Transfiguration classroom, and I'll go to Professor Flitwick's in the Charms classroom, Hugo said, stopping Hermione in front of the main staircase of the castle. Also, trust Ginger, it can help you avoid the annoying Peeves or Filch. Don't worry, I'll definitely find Professor McGonagall as soon as possible, Hermione said, nodding vigorously. You also be careful, we'll meet in front of that door after you find the professor. After saying that, the two began to split up. Hermione went to the closer Professor McGonagall's office, while Hugo ran to the Charms classroom upstairs, hoping to find his head of house as soon as possible. On the way, he almost ran into Mrs. Norris, but fortunately Fishcake helped him drive away Mrs. Norris and lure away Filch. After arriving outside the Charms classroom office, Hugo knocked on the door. He was a little worried that Professor Flitwick was sleeping at this time, but after only knocking once or twice, footsteps came from inside, and then the door opened with the sound of chains. The head of house, wearing a blue pajama and a matching sleeping cap, walked out yawning. Hugo, what are you doing here? Professor Flitwick said in surprise, waking up from his previous state the moment he raised his head and saw Hugo's face. I know you should be very happy after the final exams are over, but celebrating by sneaking around at night is terrible. Professor, I'm sorry to bother you at this time, but I do have some very important things to discuss with you, Hugo said with a serious face after listening to Professor Flitwick's slightly humorous tone. We have confirmed that someone has broken into the trapdoor guarded by the three-headed dog on the 4th floor, so Harry and the others have gone down to try to get the Philosopher's Stone before the thief steals it, and my sister and I came to notify the professors. What? Someone is trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone, and Harry and the others have already gone down. Professor Flitwick's face immediately revealed an extremely serious expression after hearing what Hugo said. Why didn't you tell us about this earlier? We did try to tell the professors this afternoon, but Professor McGonagall didn't believe us. She told us that no one could steal the Philosopher's Stone, that it was strictly protected and foolproof. And she told us to go outside and get some sun instead of staying in the cold castle. But when we went there tonight, we saw it playing harp next to the three-headed dog, used to lull it to sleep. Oh dear, this is terrible, Professor Flitwick exclaimed after Hugo told him about the things they had seen and everything that had happened tonight. Wait a minute, I'll get dressed and come with you right away. You did the right thing. This matter must be handled by us professors. After speaking, Professor Flitwick retreated into his room, and a minute later he rushed out of the office fully armed with his wand and waved to Hugo, then moved his two short legs and ran quickly towards the room on the 4th floor. Don't underestimate Professor Flitwick's height, he can still run very fast. Hugo even needed to jog to keep up with him. In just a few minutes, the two arrived at the door of the room on the 4th floor, and Hermione and Professor McGonagall were already waiting here. After a brief greeting, Professor McGonagall drew her wand and rhythmically tapped the base of a torch fixed to the wall next to the room 5 times. After the tapping ended, the bricks of that wall began to move with a rubbing sound, and soon formed a small archway on the wall that could allow 2 people to pass side by side. Let's go down from here, Professor McGonagall said after the archway was completely formed, and then several people followed him down the spiral staircase behind the door. This spiral staircase did not seem to be built temporarily, but rather seemed to have existed for a long time. On the walls on both sides were magical torches that only had light but no heat. Obviously, the professors had another dedicated passage to check the mechanisms below. Thinking about it, it wouldn't be a good thing if the professors had to jump down every time they checked. However, this passage should only be known to Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall as the deputy headmistress. Otherwise Professor Flitwick shouldn't have shown that surprised expression just now. Chapter 88 Harry is injured. The professor took the 2 of us to this room below the passage. Afterwards, the professor told us to wait here until they called you out. After giving us a few instructions on how to open the door to this room, Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick left. Then Hermione and I waited here for 5 or 6 minutes before we saw you guys come out, Hugo finally said to Harry and the others. Anyway, thank you, Harry said after listening to Hugo's account of what had just happened. They sat quietly for a few seconds, then Ron said gratefully, if it weren't for you, I would have been knocked unconscious on the forehead by that stone chess piece. Stone chess piece? What's that about? After hearing what Ron said, Hermione became curious about the challenges down below. So she turned to Veneto and asked, by the way, can you tell us what challenges you encountered before? We just encountered several challenges. For example, the first challenge was to figure out how to get past that 3-headed dog, Veneto said enthusiastically, but just as she was about to talk about how to get through the large wizard chess game prepared by Professor McGonagall, Harry's face suddenly turned ugly. Harry, what's wrong? Hermione, who was sitting across from Harry, was listening to Veneto's account diagonally opposite her, but she was also constantly observing her surroundings, so she noticed Harry's abnormality immediately. I don't know. Harry raised his hand to cover his forehead, while bending over and on the table. If Hugo hadn't been quick-witted enough to take the cup away, he might have hit his head on it. I feel like my scar is starting to hurt now, like it's burning. Why don't we go up now? Ron, supporting Harry, raised his head and said to Hugo and the others. I think we should send Harry to the school hospital as soon as possible. Madame Pomfrey should be able to heal him. No, not for now. Hugo shook his head and said. Professor McGonagall told me just now that everyone must stay in this room before they come out, because they are worried that the thief will hurt us or take us hostage once he breaks through their blockade and runs out. But Harry's now. Ron looked at his increasingly pained friend and said to Hugo, and I remember that Professor McGonagall is a very skilled transfiguration professor, and Professor Flitwick was the champion of wizarding duels when he was young. Shouldn't no one be able to escape their pursuit? Don't be so optimistic, Veneto said. Being able to think of stealing the Philosopher's Stone in Hogwarts Castle is itself a very abnormal thing. The fact that the other party dares to make such a decision proves that the thief himself must have enough strength. He may not be able to defeat the 2 professors working together, but escaping shouldn't be a problem. Then we can only wait here. Ron's tone became a little anxious. I feel like Harry can't hold on anymore. Don't worry, I can still hold on, Harry interrupted Ron, who was lowering his head. I think I can wait a little longer, until Professor McGonagall and the others solve the problem before going to the school hospital. Harry could feel waves of pain spreading from his forehead to the surrounding area. He felt like his head was about to split in 2, but he clenched his teeth tightly, because Harry knew that the person trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone was definitely a murderous demon. And he couldn't put his companions in danger because of himself at first. Harry still thought he should be able to hold on. But what he didn't expect was that the pain became more and more intense, so that he finally shouted loudly and struggled desperately in place. If Veneto hadn't stepped forward in time to grab him, he might have even heard himself open the door. Just at this moment, Professor McGonagall's voice suddenly came from the door. "We have dealt with everything. You can open the door." "Wait." Just as Ron stood up abruptly and was about to open the door, Hugo suddenly stretched out his arm, reached over the small coffee table, and grabbed his shoulder. "What are you doing?" Ron asked anxiously and angrily. He didn't expect Hugo's grip to be so strong. He struggled several times but couldn't break free from the right hand that was grabbing him. "Look at Harry, he needs treatment now. We should let Professor McGonagall and the others in quickly." "That's not Professor McGonagall outside," Hugo said, looking at Harry's painful appearance and immediately guessing what the thing outside the door making Professor McGonagall's voice was. "Professor McGonagall, as the deputy headmistress, is fully capable of opening the door herself, and she told us before to wait here for her to come over, but she didn't ask us to open the door." "But Harry," Ron said while struggling, but before he could finish speaking, the rustling sound outside immediately disappeared, and then after a slight explosion, everything outside returned to silence. "Obviously I'm a little late, but fortunately not too late." In an awkward silence, the door that had just been closed opened, and Professor Dumbledore, wearing a blue traveling robe, walked in, summoned his phoenix, and said to Hugo and his sister who were holding their wands at him with tense faces, "Being vigilant is good. But I am indeed your headmaster and not someone impersonating me. Headmaster, please take a look at Harry. He suddenly became like this just now." Hugo and Hermione immediately put down their magical barriers and said anxiously. Seeing Professor Dumbledore and the Phoenix, Hugo knew that it was completely safe now, because no one could imitate the headmaster's appearance with magic or potions and bring his Phoenix. "Let me see," Professor Dumbledore said, taking out his wand and gently waving the tip of it over Harry's scar, then chanting a spell in a low voice as the spell slowly flowed out of the headmaster's silvery white beard. Some silver blue mist emerged from the headmaster's wand and sprinkled onto Harry's face. As these mists gradually seeped into Harry's skin, Harry's furrowed brows slowly relaxed. It was at this moment that Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick walked into the room together. "How is Harry now?" Ron couldn't help but ask after Professor Dumbledore's temporary magical treatment ended. "Is he all right now?" "My magic only temporarily relieved his pain. Harry is now suffering from damage to his soul. For the sake of his health, I think he needs to rest for a few days," Professor Dumbledore said. Then he asked Professor McGonagall to conjure a stretcher, put Harry on it, and then everyone went back up the stairs to the corridor on the 4th floor together. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 89 Finish. "Oh my goodness, is that Harry?" Madame Pomfrey exclaimed in shock as Hugo and the others appeared in the school hospital wing. Simultaneously, she drew her wand and cast a spell on Harry. After the results of the magical examination came back, she immediately looked up at Professor Dumbledore. "Albus, what on earth is going on with this little one? If I remember correctly, he's only a first year. How is his physical condition so terrible?" As the sole healer in the school hospital wing, Madame Pomfrey was definitely qualified. Putting aside the fact that her first reaction upon seeing the school leaders and a group of professors was to examine the injured students on the field, the fact that a single spell revealed Harry's condition clearly demonstrated her skill. He was subjected to some dark magic, which is why he's injured like this, Dumbledore explained vaguely. At this point, he had roughly guessed that Harry's injury was related to the connection between him and Voldemort. Through questioning, he learned from Hugo and Professor McGonagall that Harry's scar had started hurting precisely when Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick began their duel. However, he didn't think it appropriate to reveal this conjecture at the moment. "Dark magic, and inside the castle no less," Madame Pomfrey said, waving her wand to levitate Harry onto a hospital bed. Then, she began a very careful examination. After what felt like a long time, she finally looked up and said, "Although his injuries are somewhat complex, fortunately they are not too severe. I believe I can have him back to his usual lively self in about a week. Now, Headmaster, and ladies and gentlemen, if there's nothing else, please leave," Madame Pomfrey said, rising to her feet and gesturing for them to leave. The patient needs rest to recover, so it needs to be quiet here." After leaving the school hospital wing, Hugo and the other students originally planned to return to their respective dormitories to rest, as it was already close to midnight. However, Professor Dumbledore called everyone to his office. Lemon sherbet. Normally, the headmaster's office appeared to be just a section of wall guarded by 2 stone gargoyles, but after Dumbledore spoke the password, they sprang aside, and the entrance to the headmaster's office opened. Hugo and the others followed Professor Dumbledore onto the automatically rotating staircase behind the stone beasts, which carried this small group of teachers and students to the door of the headmaster's office. At the top it was a gleaming oak door with a griffin-shaped brass knocker. Dumbledore pushed the door open, and everyone filed in. Upon entering the headmaster's office, Hugo immediately began to survey the room, which he was entering for the first time. Professor Dumbledore walked behind a large desk with legs shaped like the claws of some strange beast. The desk appeared cluttered, with various oddly shaped and unidentifiable silver instruments placed on it. The dusty, old sorting hat sat on a shelf along the edge of the desk. "Everyone, please sit down. I think we can all have a little hot tea first," Dumbledore said, conjuring a gilded red velvet armchair for each person with a wave of his wand and gesturing for them to sit. Then, he tapped the desk with his wand. Soon, a large silver tray containing a teapot and teacups appeared on the desk. Then, Headmaster Dumbledore waved his wand, causing the teapot to pour tea into each teacup and send them floating to each person. Hugo took the opportunity to drink tea and carefully examine the office. He noticed that it was an oval-shaped room, with walls and ceilings covered in ornate wallpaper. The walls were also adorned with portraits of former headmasters of Hogwarts. Because so many people had entered the office at once, the headmasters who had been sleeping had also woken up and were curiously watching the people in the headmaster's office. "Alright, everyone, let's talk about what happened to you just now," Professor Dumbledore said, putting down his teacup after everyone had drunk their hot tea and relaxed a little. So, for the next while, first the 2 professors, and then Hugo and the other students, each recounted what they had done that night. From everyone's account of their experiences that night, Hugo realized that, just as he had guessed, Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick had entered the final room and caught Quirrell, who was holding the Mirror of Erisden repeatedly searching for the location of the Philosopher's Stone. At first, Quirrell tried to distract the 2 professors with sophistry and take the opportunity to attack them. However, his movements could not escape the notice of Professor Flitwick, who had won many dueling championships in his youth. So, after the attempted sneak attack failed, the 2 sides immediately began to fight. From a certain point of view, it was a 2-on-2 battle. And Voldemort's side was, from a certain point of view, even stronger. However, because Voldemort had forcibly taken over Quirrell's body when facing Veneto's barrage in the Forbidden Forest, even after using many spells and various potions and unicorn blood purchased on the black market to try to heal, he only managed to slow down the collapse of the body and failed to reverse its decay. And this problem suddenly erupted when he fought against Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick. At first, he had suppressed the joint attack of Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick, but soon the injuries on his body completely erupted because Voldemort was fully engaged in the battle with the 2 professors. So, to the surprise of the 2 professors, Professor Quirrell, who had originally been in the upper hands in the battle, suddenly developed a large number of wounds, and then his entire body gradually shattered before their eyes, eventually turning into a pile of ashes. Amidst his shrill, banshee-like screams at the same time, a cloud of black mist rose from the pile of ashes and quickly flew towards the exit of the underground structure. Because the cloud of mist was flying too fast, the 2 professors ultimately failed to catch it. Only when Voldemort, transformed into mist, was escaping, he sensed Harry's presence nearby through the soul connection and tried to imitate Professor McGonagall's voice to trick Hugo and the others into opening the door and then attacking Harry. What he didn't expect was that Hugo didn't fall for it, and Dumbledore arrived too quickly, so in the end he could only escape the castle in a disheveled state. The headmaster, on the one hand, was worried about Harry's condition, and on the other hand, he roughly knew that Voldemort's current state was terrible, but he had no way to stop him. So, he simply let go of Voldemort in the form of black mist and entered the room. Then began to check on Harry's condition. "I must say that everyone did very well tonight, and thanks to you, the Philosopher's Stone did not fall into the hands of someone who should not have it, so I must thank you," Professor Dumbledore said, standing up after listening to everyone's account of tonight's events, and then bowing solemnly to everyone. Chapter 90 Principal and Chapter X27, S Office. Seeing Headmaster Dumbledore bow and thank him, Hugo and the others immediately stood up, returned the bow, and said that these things were what they should do, and were not worth the headmaster's thanks. And the following time, everyone chatted for a few more minutes about some details of tonight, and then Headmaster Dumbledore signaled that everyone could leave here and return to their respective rooms to rest. So Hugo and the others bid farewell to Professor McGonagall and the others at the entrance of the headmaster's office and walked towards their respective lounges. The things you three did today were still a bit reckless. What if you really encountered that person? Because he was worried that there were still some dangerous factors in the castle, Professor Flitwick simply chose to send Hugo and the others back to Ravenclaw Tower. On the way, the Dean of Ravenclaw began to nag at Hugo and the other two. Sorry, Professor Flitwick. Listening to Professor Flitwick's nagging full of concern, Hugo said with embarrassment on his face. The main thing is that Harry is our friend, and we couldn't find anyone who could help us for a while after we discovered the problem, so we could only be with him. Alright, I don't mean to blame you, Professor Flitwick said. Although our Ravenclaw students are not known for their bravery, I still appreciate your behavior. Because whether it is bravely facing difficulties or trying to help friends, they are all very good qualities. I say this just to remind you that the next time you encounter the same thing, it is best to think more beforehand, and don't rush up directly when your head gets hot. For example, tonight's matter, you can completely tell me in advance and let me handle it. After all, I am your dean. Speaking of this, Professor Flitwick shrugged his shoulders. Of course. I admit that as a professor, sometimes I may ignore the information provided by you students, but I will pay attention to this aspect in the future. No, Professor, you didn't do anything wrong this time. The news we got before was really alarming, and it is difficult for normal people to trust those news, Hugo said, and to be honest, we were indeed too reckless this time, but at least I don't regret it. Your choice is also normal. After all, you are some children, and children will always do certain things because of temporary impulses. Flitwick smiled and said, at least your actions this time were out of the pursuit of justice and friendship, so I don't think you have made any big mistakes. If Hugo remembered correctly, he had read in the information in his previous life that Professor Flitwick, like Professor McGonagall, had made the Sorting Hat think for a long time during the sorting ceremony, and was even almost assigned to Gryffindor. Therefore, Professor Flitwick's attitude towards Hugo and the others' adventure was mainly positive. Just as Hugo and the others left the headmaster's office and prepared to return to their respective dormitories to rest, Headmaster Dumbledore also changed into his dressing gown and sat down in the chair behind the desk in his office. Then he began to talk to the headmaster portraits on the walls that had already woken up. I am very happy to see that our school has successors, whether it is the students of Gryffindor or the several students of Ravenclaw. I see wisdom, courage, and talent in them. Most importantly, I find that everyone has a kind heart. It's really surprising to hear such an evaluation from your mouth, Phineas Nigellus Black. The portrait of the most unpopular headmaster in Hogwarts history showed a disdainful expression. I remember you seemed to have said similar things half a century ago, but what about that person? No, it's different. Professor Dumbledore waved his index finger at the portrait and said seriously. Tom back then looked more intelligent, courageous, and talented than the children we met tonight. The only difference is that he doesn't understand love. After all, everyone's background, experience, education, etc. are different. At least from tonight's events, I don't think these children will repeat the same mistakes and go down the wrong path, Professor Dumbledore finally concluded. And I also understand what I should do and will not repeat the mistakes I made before. Speaking of this, the headmaster sighed deeply, and then a rare look of confusion appeared on his face. I sometimes wonder now, if I had adopted a gentler approach back then, and paid more attention to Tom, maybe he wouldn't be. Of course, no one else knew about the headmaster's memories or even regrets about the past. For example, Hugo was excitedly connecting to the Admiral network at this time and began to count the destiny points he had obtained this time because he participated in the most important event of the first-year finals in the original text this time and greatly changed the original plot. He naturally obtained a large number of destiny points. So, as soon as Hugo lay down on the bed, Victory's extremely excited voice entered his mind through the Admiral network. Admiral, a great harvest. This time, a total of 92 destiny points were obtained. Victory began to report in detail. Among them, Neville's absence is 0.5 points, and your Envenenos joining the team is 2 points. Using a different method from the original version to pass the three-headed dog Fluffy is 7 points, Venedos taking action to grab that key is 12 points, and the slight changes during the chess game are 2 points. In addition, the most important part is that you successfully prevented the small team in the original text from entering the last 3 levels, and Harry did not face Voldemort, so a total of 52 destiny points were obtained. And the battle between the professors and Voldemort at the end, and Voldemort's attempt to seduce you made you gain 16.5 more destiny points. This is simply a great harvest. Hugo became excited all of a sudden after hearing the report. After all, compared to those destiny points that he had tried to change the plot to obtain before, this time it can be said that it broke out all at once. But soon after recovering from the excitement, a question immediately arose in his mind. To be honest, I feel that although tonight's action was more difficult than the previous few times I tried to change the plot, it didn't produce that kind of huge difference. Why did I get so many more destiny points this time? To be honest, I'm not very clear about the details. After hearing Hugo's question, Victory, who existed as a system spirit, was stunned for a moment, and then said seriously, "But I think this may be related to some arrangements in the original text, or in other words, related to fate. Can you talk about it in detail?" Hugo was immediately intrigued when he heard Victory say this, so he asked, "Can you explain in detail what you mean by fate here?" Chapter 91 How are you doing? Yes, my Admiral. I will tell you everything I know. But I still want to say that these things are just my deductions based on the information I had previously, and do not represent the actual situation, Victory said after Hugo inquired, pausing to think for a moment. However, these things are not fabricated out of thin air, but are based on a series of logical analyses, so I think they should be very close to the truth. After laying the groundwork, Victory began to reveal the results of her and the ship girl's previous analysis. According to the experience they had accumulated in previous incidents, they discovered that the greater the change to the original text, the more destiny points they obtained. Furthermore, with the same degree of change, the more important the event in the original text, the more destiny points they gained. In other words, the so-called destiny of this world, or rather, the destiny that can be used by us, is the book Harry Potter and all its derivatives, Victory concluded after explaining her analysis. But these contents are not predetermined, we can change them through our actions. For example, Hood and those Soviet ship girls changed the destinies of hundreds, even thousands, of people. But you didn't get any feedback in destiny points, and that's because those things were unrelated to the book Harry Potter and its derivatives. Therefore, from our current perspective, similar events may result in vastly different amounts of destiny points depending on their importance in the story. For example, tonight's event can be considered the most crucial event of the first year, which is why your intervention earned you so many destiny points. I see, I think I understand, Hugo said, nodding thoughtfully after listening to Victory. It seems that in the future, we should carefully plan when facing these things, in order to obtain as many destiny points as possible while meeting certain prerequisites. No problem, Admiral, Victory said. In fact, the sisters have already begun analyzing the things in your memory, but because your existence has caused changes to the original history, this analysis also needs to be constantly updated. Okay, I'm really sorry to trouble you, Hugo said somewhat embarrassedly. I hope it doesn't affect your current lives and everything you're doing. After finishing the discussion with Victory, Hugo began to inquire about the detailed condition of the other ship girls, whom he had somewhat neglected because he had been busy dealing with this major event recently. He learned that everyone was doing very well. For example, on the British ship girl side, Belfast had become the hottest-selling author in Europe and America recently. Thinking about it, it made sense. Because of the existence of wizards, this world was not much different from Hugo's previous world in the grand scheme of things. It could even be said to be exactly the same. However, in some unimportant aspects, there were significant differences, such as in the cultural industry. According to the series of cultural and entertainment web novels Hugo had read in his previous life, this kind of world was actually very suitable for cultural industry plagiarists. And his previous life happened to be in the internet age, so he naturally read a lot of books, listened to a lot of songs, and watched a lot of movies. Even more fortunately, after coming to this world, for some magical reason, Hugo was able to accurately recall all the content he had seen in this area in his previous life. Therefore, after uploading all this information to the Admiral Network, Belfast, who chose to receive this memory and strive in this direction, was actually equivalent to the protagonist of those entertainment novels from a certain perspective. Achieving such success was naturally within everyone's expectations. Hood, with the help of St. George, greatly accelerated the work of organizing the chaotic areas in London. After all, relying solely on fists and bribery could only maintain temporary order and stability. Making everyone identify with something from the bottom of their hearts was the most important thing. The Soviet ship girls were among the best in ideological education, but St. George's level was also good on the British ship girl side. At least, according to Hood, since St. George joined her plan, she had reformed a large number of outlaws and greatly promoted the transformation of those areas. In addition, in the past few months, Hood and her team also gained a foothold in Nocturne Alley with the help of the captured Muggle-born wizards, and profited by selling some goods imported from Russia and parts of Eastern Europe. These goods were obtained from those Soviet ship girls. Because the situation on the border was chaotic, the ship girls with sufficient ability easily carved out a world for themselves, both in the magical world and the ordinary world. For example, they had now successfully established a complete, though imperfect, food production and processing system in the lower Volga River region where Volgograd was located, using the spoil seized from the gangs and the wealth obtained through a series of financial operations as the most primitive capital, because they keenly discovered that Russia had a huge grain shortage and hoped to reduce the suffering of ordinary people in the region through this means. Those magical manors they had previously obtained also began to be carefully managed. As the chaos in the ordinary world further spread, the magical world in Russia was naturally affected. Under this situation, the Soviet ship girls easily hired enough wizards to work for them. At least now everyone's industries in the magical world have formed a very good economic cycle, the Soviet representative of the Soviet ship girls said to Hugo that night. The situation here is a bit bad now, both in the ordinary world and the magical world, but I believe that with our efforts, we can always help some people. After fully understanding what the ship girls had been doing recently, it was past 12 o'clock at night. So Hugo hurriedly said goodnight to everyone in the Admiral network and went to sleep. Perhaps because he had encountered too many things before, he quickly fell into deep sleep because he was too tired before. Hugo didn't dream that night and slept soundly until dawn. As a result, the next morning, his biological clock still woke Hugo up at 6 o'clock in the morning because of multiple body enhancements. Even though he had only slept for 6 hours, he still felt incredibly energetic. So Hugo thought for a while and simply gave up the plan to sleep in, got up, and after a simple wash, went out with Veneto, who was already waiting in the common lounge, to exercise. Your sister may still need to sleep a little longer. She's just a normal 12-year-old girl, unlike us who have such a strong physique, Veneto said while exercising. So I didn't call her at all when I got up this morning. After all, she went to bed too late last night, so she should get some sleep this morning. Chapter 92 Visit. Oh, you should have called me when you were exercising today. When Hugo and Veneto returned to the common room after their exercise, they happened to meet Hermione, who had just finished packing up and was coming downstairs. Seeing Hugo and Veneto, Hermione immediately said, "Maintaining good habits is very important, so it doesn't matter if you sleep a little less sometimes, okay? I will definitely call you next time I encounter a similar situation." Veneto gave Hermione a serious look and nodded in agreement. "I hope you can stick to your current thinking when you encounter such a situation next time." When the three of them finished packing up and went to the Great Hall for dinner in high spirits, Hugo was surprised to find that his experience last night, after some details were blurred, had spread like wildfire. Not only Ravenclaw, but also Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, and even Slytherin were whispering about it when Hugo and the others appeared in the Great Hall. The discussion in the hall paused briefly, and then many people turned their attention to them. Seeing this scene, Hugo took a deep breath and then walked to his seat with the two ladies as usual and began to enjoy his breakfast. During this process, several Ravenclaw students came over and surrounded them, hoping they could talk about what they had done the previous night. So Hugo quickly finished his bread, bacon, and milk breakfast, and then gave everyone a rough description of what happened last night, and then took his sister and Veneto away from the crowd while everyone was discussing. Everyone is really too enthusiastic. After walking out of the hall and arriving at an empty corridor, Veneto asked, "To avoid being surrounded by everyone, I think we should go to a place with fewer people. What do you think about going to the library to read? There will definitely be few people in the library at this time." "Yes, that's indeed a good idea." This idea was supported by Hugo and his sister, but just as everyone was about to walk towards the library, Hermione suddenly stopped them. "Wait, I suddenly thought of something. Harry is still in the school hospital. Shouldn't we go see him?" This, indeed, we should, Hugo nodded. No matter what, Harry went on an adventure with them yesterday. In this case, they should be considered comrades in arms. Under this premise, it would be impolite not to visit him after making a decision. They turned a corner on the grand staircase outside the Great Hall and walked towards the school hospital on the side of the castle. Because now is the most relaxed time for everyone after the exams, there was no one in the slightly dark and damp corridor, and only the sound of their footsteps echoed in the ancient castle. "Are you here to see Harry?" Madame Pomfrey quickly greeted them after they entered the school hospital. "Harry has drunk some sedative potions and hasn't woken up yet, so you'd better keep quiet." "Thank you." Hugo and the others nodded to Madame Pomfrey and then walked into the ward of the school hospital. Because Harry was the only one hospitalized in the school hospital ward now, Hugo and the others quickly found the bed where Harry was lying. Seeing Harry lying on the bed with a pale face and lifeless, Hugo and the others all showed slightly worried expressions on their faces. Even though they also knew from Madame Pomfrey that Harry should be fine now, Harry in this state still made them feel a little worried. "Don't worry. Harry's current coma is due to the effect of the potion," Madame Pomfrey said after Hermione asked when Harry would wake up. "Because he suffered damage to his soul this time, being in a coma now is good for him and can help him recover in this area." Because Harry was still in a coma, Hugo and the others left the school hospital after sitting for a while, and then went to the school library to read. After all, this place was quiet enough, and not too many people would come to harass them because of what happened last night. Moreover, for Hugo and Veneto, it was most important to seize the last school time of this academic year and acquire as much knowledge from books as possible. As for the fact that most of the books could not be understood, it was not a problem for them at all. Anyway, after uploading the knowledge to the Admiral network, Hugo and the others had enough manpower and power to figure these things out. Therefore, in the remaining time, Hugo and the others almost lived a life of going between the dormitory, the library, and the restaurant. The only exception was that they took an afternoon to find Hagrid and do a final check on that book about magical creatures. In fact, this time, because it was the last check, there were very few problems. In theory, it would only take more than half an hour to get everything done. The reason why Hugo and the others spent so long was purely to calm Hagrid down, because Hagrid started crying sadly the first time he saw Hugo and the others. "It's all my fault, this idiot." He covered his face with his hands and wept. "I told that villain how to subdue Fluffy. I told him. He knew everything, except this, and I just happened to tell him. You almost lost your lives. All for a dragon egg. I'll never drink again. I should be kicked out and be a muggle for the rest of my life." "Don't cry, Hagrid." Veneto, who usually had the best relationship with Hagrid, pretended to pat his arm hard, because he was afraid of breaking his arm if he really used force. "It's really not your fault, after all. We all know who we were facing this time. To be honest, not many people can keep their secrets in front of the Dark Lord." "Vittorio is right," Hugo also chimed in at this time. "At least from the books I've read, I found that wizards have many ways to dig out secrets from another person's heart, such as Veritaserum, or Legilimency. To be honest, we should actually be thankful now that you haven't been harmed by this." "Yes, so it's best to be happier and forget all these unpleasant things," finally, Hermione persuaded. "Anyway, the Philosopher's Stone has been protected, and that person didn't succeed. So you should quickly forget those unpleasant things and welcome a new life, such as thinking about your book." Thank you for your help." After listening to everyone's persuasion, Hagrid took out a handkerchief to wipe his nose, and then looked up at Hugo and asked, "Did you just mention that there was a problem with my book?" "There are only a few small places that need to be confirmed with you one last time." Hugo took out a simple edition of the book that had already been bound from his bag and placed it on the table. This book was previously printed by Veneto by hand, because there was also a small mimeograph in her ship's equipment space. Because large warships are often a small society, there are many daily facilities on them. Things like mimeographs are also relatively common. It was also because of this that Veneto was able to print the first edition of this book at the school. Chapter 93 End of Term. During their remaining time at the cabin, Hugo and the others used the first edition book to communicate with Hagrid one last time. Fortunately, the few remaining issues weren't too complex, consisting only of minor details. By the time they left Hagrid's hut before dinner that afternoon, the book was essentially complete. Next came the issue of publishing the book. After all, they hadn't compiled it just for their own amusement, but hoped to share it with others. Sadly, although Hagrid was past 60, His profession had kept him at Hogwarts Castle for years, so he didn't know many people involved in publishing. "Don't worry, leave it to us," Veneto said with a smile, standing up. "I think my sister knows people in that field. You know, although she lives in the Muggle world now, she traveled throughout the magical world of Europe before and met all sorts of people. There should be someone involved in publishing among them." With Hagrid's thanks, Hugo and the others left Hagrid's hut. Night had already fallen, and stars appeared in the black velvet sky. Because this matter had added 2 more fate points to Hugo, he practically hummed all the way back to the castle because his fate points had reached triple digits for the first time. Hugo had been in excellent spirits for the next few days. He also maintained his good habits with his sister and Veneto. In addition, chatting with the ship girls through the Admiral network every day became his most enjoyable time during this period. Of course, the Quidditch Cup final was also held during this time. Although Harry, the genius seeker, was in the hospital, Wood still managed to find a substitute. Unfortunately, this fourth-year Gryffindor brothers level could only be described as barely meeting the minimum standard, not at all comparable to Ravenclaw's sixth-year veteran. As a result, Ravenclaw had an overwhelming advantage throughout the match. Finally, after half an hour of intense competition, they won a landslide victory with a score of 220-60. Thus winning this year's Quidditch Cup. The peaceful life continued until the afternoon of the day before the end of term feast. That day, as they were reading in the library, they saw Ron walk in. Ron then told them that Harry had woken up. At Harry's request, he had obtained permission from Madame Pomfrey to go in and chat with Harry for a long time, until he was finally kicked out by Madame Pomfrey. After hearing Ron say this, Hugo and the others gave up the idea of seeing Harry right away, because they knew that Harry needed as much rest as possible due to his soul being injured. Rather than discussing what Voldemort had done in this incident or why Voldemort wanted to kill Harry, of course, this didn't mean that Hugo and the others did nothing. He had previously asked Hood through the Admiral network to help make a top-notch English afternoon tea suitable for the week, and mailed it over via owl post. So at this time, he could just bring these things to the school hospital and ask Madame Pomfrey to help pass them on. Obviously, from Madame Pomfrey's attitude, Hugo could see that she appreciated this way of visiting without disturbing the patient. "These pastries look fantastic," managing to be as suitable as possible for patients while also being delicious, Madame Pomfrey said, taking the picnic basket and looking at it before heading towards the ward, adding, "I'll give these to Harry now, I'm sure he'll love them." Harry had just woken up at this time, and his body was still a little weak, so he simply leaned against the pillows on the head of the bed, basking in the sun. When he heard the noise, he looked towards Madame Pomfrey, who was carrying a basket, with a hopeful expression because he had heard their voices outside just now. He tried hard to move his body, wanting to find the traces of his friends, but unfortunately, he didn't notice that there were other people behind Madame Pomfrey. The Granger siblings and Miss Veneto came to see you specially, but because they knew you needed to rest, they left these pastries and left, Madame Pomfrey said, placing the basket on the bedside table, unobtrusively blocking the chocolate frogs and Bertie Bott's every flavor beans that others had given Harry. "Such high-end pastries," Harry muttered softly as soon as he saw the pastries. Having lived in the Muggle world for more than 10 years before entering school, he naturally recognized that the pastries personally made by Hood were of the highest quality. He had only seen them in magazines subscribed to by his aunt when he was at the Dursleys, so Harry picked up a pastry from the top and ate it. Unlike what he had imagined, this cream pastry, which seemed to have a lot of nut cream sprinkled on it, was not as sweet as it looked, but that unique taste and tempting aroma instantly filled his entire mouth, making him unable to resist reaching for the next pastry. "I just checked and found that these pastries are much healthier for you than those snacks," Madame Pomfrey said, nodding as she watched Harry constantly stuffing pastries into his mouth. "Because these pastries have fresh nuts, fruits, and dairy products added, and the sugar is controlled to a reasonable level. However, even so, I personally suggest that you still not eat too much." Madame Pomfrey took out a plate, put some pastries on it, and handed it to Harry, then took the basket away. "You can only eat this much today. After all, you've been unconscious for several days. It's not appropriate to eat so many pastries all at once." Although Harry felt a little regretful about Madame Pomfrey's control over his food intake, he didn't think it was a bad thing, because in this way, he could share these delicious pastries with Ron. Thinking of this, he quickly finished the pastries on the plate, and then slept until dawn the next day when the end-of-term feast was held the next evening. Hugo was happy to see that the Great Hall was decorated with blue and bronze, the colors representing Ravenclaw, to celebrate their victory in the House Cup. On the wall behind the head table, there was also a huge banner depicting the Ravenclaw eagle. Because of Hugo, Hermione, and Venetto's presence in Ravenclaw, they earned a large number of points for the house in class. Naturally, under this change, Ravenclaw finally won. Also for this reason, most of the students in the school seemed very happy. Only the Slytherin students seemed very depressed. Because this year, Slytherin ended its history of winning the House Cup for 7 consecutive years. Not long after Hugo and the others sat down in their seats, Professor Dumbledore walked in, and then, after everyone quieted down, began the final speech of the term. The first thing in the speech was naturally to announce the scores of each house for the academic year and the ownership of the House Cup. Perhaps because the number of people called for Harry sending out the dragon was less than in the original text, this time Hufflepuff was at the bottom with 352 points, followed by Gryffindor with 407 points, Slytherin with 466 points, and Ravenclaw with 472 points. I just don't know if Headmaster Dumbledore will add points to Harry and the others next, Hugo thought after all the scores were read out, but no matter what, Gryffindor shouldn't be able to win. Chapter 94 Banquet. After Professor Dumbledore announced all the scores, the Ravenclaw table erupted in thunderous cheers and stomping, with even some of the older students abandoning their usual restraint, banging their cutlery against other utensils or the tables at the same time. Applause broke out at the other house tables. Hufflepuff and Gryffindor were celebrating Ravenclaw's success in breaking Slytherin's 7-year winning streak for the House Cup, while Slytherin was politely offering their applause. Yes, well done, Dumbledore said. However, some recent events must also be taken into account. The Great Hall became very quiet, everyone stopping what they were doing and looking at Professor Dumbledore. Veneto looked a little nervous, worried that Professor Dumbledore might be too biased towards Harry and his friends. This worry was only slightly related to the house's honor. What occupied most of Veneto's mind was concern about the extent of the plot changes. After all, if Gryffindor ended up winning the House Cup, the fate points they could obtain this time would definitely be much less. Don't worry, the headmaster may be biased, but he still has a moral bottom line, Hugo said to Veneto through the Admiral network, while reaching out and taking her hand on the table. I think the headmaster will give them points, but he will also fairly give us points. Dumbledore cleared his throat. I have a few last points to award. Let me see. Yes, first, Mr. Ron Weasley. Ron's face flushed red, looking like a sun-dried carrot. He won the most brilliant game of chess Hogwarts has seen in many years, and I award Gryffindor House 50 points for that. The Gryffindor's cheers nearly blew the enchanted ceiling off. The stars above seemed to tremble slightly. Percy could be heard loudly telling the other prefects, "That's my brother, you know. My youngest brother." He got past Professor McGonagall's giant chessboard. Hugo could feel the tension rising among the Ravenclaw students at their table, as this suddenly added 50 points to Gryffindor. However, trusting in the headmaster's character, Hugo himself politely applauded. Second, Miss Veneto Vittorio. Whether facing Devil's Snare or rooms with curses, she can calmly think and take the most appropriate measures to solve the difficulties encountered, so I will award Ravenclaw House 50 points. The Ravenclaw students, hearing the headmaster's words, swept away their previous tension, and smiles returned to their faces. Several familiar girls stood up and gently patted Veneto's shoulder or back, praising her loudly. Third, Harry Potter, Dumbledore said. The Great Hall became exceptionally quiet. He has shown great daring and courage, and for that, I award Gryffindor House 60 points. The noise was deafening. Those students who could still calculate scores in their heads while shouting knew that Gryffindor now had 517 points, successfully surpassing their old rival. Slytherin. Dumbledore raised a hand. The Great Hall gradually quieted down again. Courage comes in many forms. Facing enemies, we need great courage. And admitting our shortcomings and seeking help from others also requires courage, so I will award the Granger siblings 30 points. As soon as Dumbledore finished speaking, enthusiastic applause and cheers erupted from the Ravenclaw table. At first, everyone really thought that the victory they had in hand was about to be given away. But they didn't expect that Hugo and his friends also added valuable points to Ravenclaw in this matter, allowing them to hold on to the House Cup. Gryffindor also cheered at this time. In any case, after 7 long years, they had finally surpassed their old rival, Slytherin, so even if they didn't win the House Cup, it was enough for them to celebrate. And the Hufflepuffs, who had always been stable in the rankings, were also satisfied after watching such an exciting show. Perhaps only the Slytherins were not very happy, but considering the Slytherins' character, as long as they were not first, any other ranking was irrelevant to them, so they did not react much to Gryffindor surpassing them. Next was the time to enjoy the end-of-year banquet's delicacies. This banquet could be said to be one of the highest-level banquets at Hogwarts. Not only were there traditional British dishes such as roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, but also some Indian dishes such as Indian butter chicken. In this regard, Hugo found a commonality between the British wizarding world and the ordinary human world, that is, in various banquets, besides the local cuisine, the most popular is Indian cuisine. It could be said that tonight was another happy night. In addition to these delicious dishes that were usually difficult to eat, the difference in the House Cup's ownership from the original text also earned Hugo 2.5 fate points. The reason why there were not many fate points was because this change originated from Hugo and his friends' previous actions, so naturally, it was impossible to repeatedly obtain fate points on the same matter. And these 2.5 fate points were only for the series of events that led to the change in the final House Cup ownership. The exam results were announced early the next morning. Veneto undoubtedly obtained first place in the year, followed by Firefly. Hermione and Hugo obtained third and fourth place respectively. This small change in ranking earned Hugo 0.5 fate points. Ravenclaw performed well overall in this exam, but perhaps because first-year students had a lighter academic burden and the content they learned was simpler, the other houses' students of the same grade did not perform badly either. Even Crabbe and Goyle, who are usually at the bottom, successfully passed the final exams. Harry and Ron unexpectedly received high scores. Considering that practical operations accounted for a large portion of the score in Hogwarts exams, Hugo could confirm that Harry and his friends were at least very talented in learning magic. Of course, this was also related to them hiding in the library and studying hard when they were ostracized by their classmates. It seemed that suddenly, their wardrobes were empty, and everything was packed into trunks. Hugo and Veneto returned all the books they had borrowed from the library. Notices were sent to each student, warning them not to use magic during the holidays. I was hoping they'd forget to send these to us, Fred Weasley said regretfully to Hugo. After going home, Mom will strictly control our use of wands. It's not as convenient to use wands at school after all. Stop complaining, we can only put away our wands during the holidays, Hugo said. We're much worse off than you in this regard. Chapter 95 Going Home, Repair. When everyone left Hogwarts, Hagrid was responsible for leading them onto the fleet of boats that crossed the lake. During this process, Hugo and the others on the boat assured Hagrid, who was not far away, that they would find a way to print a batch of his book during the summer vacation. Don't worry, I've already asked my sister with the school's owl, and she said she's found a printing house. If there are no accidents, we'll be able to start printing once we bring the original manuscript back, Veneto said. Do you have any specific requirements for printing, such as how many copies at a time, and whether you want paperback or hardcover? Actually, I think 50 copies should be enough, and it's best to be paperback, Hagrid said, scratching his head, looking a little embarrassed. After all, my book is just a book about some magical creature knowledge. I don't think there will be too many people who want to read it. It would be terrible if your sister lost money if it didn't sell. Hagrid, you still need to be more confident, Hermione said at this time. At least I think the knowledge contained in your book can be said to be comparable to fantastic beasts and where to find them, so there's no need for you to lack confidence. After all, if you don't think well of it yourself, how can you get others to accept this book? Really? Hagrid asked, scratching his head a little embarrassedly after hearing Hermione say this. As a result, he saw Hugo and the other two nodding seriously together. If that's the case, then I'll leave everything to you. I think you should be able to make the best choice for me in this regard. After ending the conversation about book publishing, the small boats they were riding on also docked at the pier near the Hogsmeade train station. Then everyone, led by Hagrid, went to the train station. A dozen minutes later, they boarded the Hogwarts Express, chatting and laughing all the way, watching the countryside outside the window become more and more verdant and tidy. The train passed through Muggle towns one by one. They ate various snacks sold on the train, took off their wizard robes, and put on jackets and short tops. Finally, the train stopped at platform 9 3/4 of King's Cross Station. It took them a long time to get out of the platform completely. Because there was a wizened old guard guarding the ticket gate on the platform, only allowing 2 or 3 people to pass at a time, so that they wouldn't have a large group of people coming in and out of the solid wall at the same time, attracting the attention of Muggles. It took a little time to queue up to leave, but fortunately, they finally passed through the exit smoothly. As soon as Hugo came out of the exit, he saw his parents and Hood chatting in the distance. Seeing Hugo and the others come out, the Granger couple immediately ended their conversation with Hood, and then hugged him and Hermione respectively. After all, they hadn't seen Hugo and the others since the last Christmas holiday, so they seemed a little excited after seeing their children again. "Don't worry, Mom, we're doing well at school," Hugo heard his sister say to his mother while hugging his father. "I even think I've grown taller than I was at Christmas, and you know what, Mom, I got 3rd place in the final exam this year." "3rd place in the final exam? Sounds pretty good," Mrs. Granger said happily, but just as she didn't have time to say anything more, a middle-aged man's voice came from a distance, sounding a little exasperated. Hurry up, kid, we can't afford to waste a whole day. Are those your classmates?" Mr. Granger also looked over in the direction of Hugo's gaze when he turned his gaze to the source of the sound. As a result, he saw a middle-aged fat man yelling unkindly at a thin boy wearing glasses. "They are our classmates, but not from the same house," Hugo said, watching Harry and his aunt's family walking out of the train station. "His name is Harry Potter. He's an orphan. His parents were all policemen in the wizarding world. They sacrificed in the previous fight against terrorists. So now he's fostered into his aunt's house." "Alice, these foster families are really a bit," Mr. Granger sighed softly after hearing Hugo's words, and then said as if he had thought of something. "By the way, you know so much about his situation because you are friends with him?" "Yes, we have a pretty good relationship," Hugo nodded and said. "Because we have experienced a lot of things together at school, and then naturally became friends." I understand. The friendship between boys is always so direct. For example, supporting the same star, playing on the same team, or even inexplicably getting into a fight together can become the beginning of friendship, like my friend when I was young, Mr. Granger told Hugo about his experiences when he was young while leading everyone towards the car. After getting in the car, he turned his head from the driver's seat and said, "If you are friends, you can invite him to visit our house for a period of time during the summer vacation. I don't think he's having a pleasant time in that foster home." After saying that, Mr. Granger turned his head, started the car, and embarked on the road home. Along the way, Mrs. Granger kept asking Hugo and Hermione about the things that happened at school. After they got home, everyone just tidied up a little and immediately busied themselves with dinner. Fortunately, Mrs. Granger had made most of the preparations before departure, so dinner was cooked very quickly. Only a dozen minutes later, a table of hot and hearty dinner appeared on the table. And all of these things were Hugo and Hermione's favorite foods. "Hurry up and eat, children," Mrs. Granger said after the food was brought to the table. "I heard that the level of your school's restaurant can even reach the level of a Michelin restaurant. It seems that Hogwarts is indeed a good school. But I believe the food I make should be more to your liking." "Of course, Mom," Hugo said, taking a sip of mushroom cream soup, and then he and Hermione talked about the interesting things that happened at school. Of course, the two siblings also tacitly avoided the things that happened at the end of the term to avoid their parents worrying about them. "That classmate of yours, Harry, is indeed good, and the Weasley twins are also very interesting," Mr. Granger said to Hugo during the after-dinner drink time. "You can invite your friends to our house for the holidays during the summer vacation. At least in my day, visiting friends' houses was an indispensable part of interpersonal relationships." In such a warm atmosphere, the Granger family happily spent the first day after the two siblings returned home. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 96 Holidays Start. Hugo had many things to do during this summer vacation. For example, try inviting a few friends to his house, and learn some new knowledge and skills. More importantly, he wanted to summon more ship girls to enrich the size of his fleet and expand his strength. Unfortunately, things changed before he could execute any of these plans. The morning of the second day after returning home, Mr. Granger told them that the family might be taking an international trip for most of the first month of the summer vacation, and the destination was the famous resort of Hawaii. "This is what I promised your mother back then, but unfortunately, I didn't have much time before," Mr. Granger explained to his two children. Now I finally have both money and time, so I want to fulfill the promise I made to your mother back then. Of course, I have also booked tickets for you, but if you don't want to go, don't force yourselves. I can entrust you to. We are willing to go, of course," Hugo and Hermione said at the same time before Mr. Granger could finish speaking. Although the Granger couple had taken Hugo and Hermione to other countries before, they had only visited a few countries in Western Europe that were relatively close to the UK because they were busy before. Therefore, they were quite interested in seeing America, especially Hugo, for whom Hawaii was not just a resort, but also an important naval port, Pearl Harbor. He felt that if he wanted to recruit ship girls, he would definitely be able to find many places and items that could be used to recruit ship girls there. According to the plan, they were to depart in 3 days. So, on the day before departure, after packing his luggage and having free time, Hugo specifically met with Wood, who had come to inspect the property under the guise of business, at that high-end luxury goods clearance store, and then began to discuss a series of issues related to ship girl summoning and the enhancement of himself. "I think you should strengthen yourself first. After all, we can't be by your side 24 hours a day," Hood said to Hugo as soon as she saw him, advising him to take out a portion of his destiny points to strengthen himself first. After all, in the eyes of the ship girls, the Admiral's safety is the most important thing. "You're right, strengthening myself is indeed a good idea, and allowing myself to obtain a portion of the Avatar's power should be the fastest way," Hugo nodded seriously after listening to Hood's words. In fact, during the entire school year, he also realized that in this ship girl Admiral system, although he was the core, he was also the weakest link. And this weakness is also one of the important reasons why he often had to hide the ship girl's strength, especially since he was about to travel to the United States. Considering the American people's love for guns, he felt that he really needed to strengthen himself for the sake of protecting his and his family's lives. Although ordinary tourists shouldn't encounter any problems. But as the saying goes, it's better to be prepared than to be caught off guard, and it's better to prepare for some things in advance than to try to find a solution when the time comes. Of course, there were still many detailed issues regarding strengthening. Therefore, after making the decision to strengthen, Hugo instantly began to consult everyone through the Admiral network about which avatar would be better to use as the object of the next strengthening. As a result, only a few seconds later, the ship girls made a unified decision. "We think you should exchange all the avatars you can obtain now." Victory appeared from the air at this time and said to Hugo, "After all, you now have enough destiny points to do these things, and your body can also withstand the problems that may arise after being strengthened by multiple ordinary avatars at the same time. I currently have 5 avatars available for exchange," Hugo calculated in his heart. "That is to say, if I exchange them all, I will be equivalent to summoning one less main battleship ship girl. But even if I exchange all these things, I shouldn't be able to beat a small ship's ship girl, let alone a battleship," because Hugo didn't close the interface between himself and the Admiral network while he was thinking about this. The ship girls naturally heard his thoughts. Soon, the ship girls began to chirp and criticize his views. "Commander, I must remind you that your safety is much more important than summoning a few more of our companions," the Soviet's voice rang in the Admiral network. "Therefore, we think you must clarify what is more important in this regard." Okay, I understand," Hugo said, and then, under everyone's supervision, exchanged all 5 avatars that he could exchange now. After he finished exchanging them, he realized that because all of them were ordinary avatars and related to the Admiral, most of the skills that came with these avatars overlap with the skills of the non-chief avatar. Of course, this does not mean that these avatars did not have their own characteristics. For example, the young, short-haired female Admiral avatar taught Hugo the art of makeup, while the older Admiral avatar instantly gave him a large amount of knowledge related to the sea, marine life, navigation, and ports. The Asian young Admiral avatar had the most skills, and they were mainly concentrated in various martial arts unique to Northeast Asia. For example, he learned Sanda, Taekwondo, Karate, bayonet skills, and Kendo from it. The diver and lolly Admiral avatars gave Hugo the most ordinary skills. Among them, the diver gave him various knowledge about diving, while the lolly Admiral avatar only gave him knowledge about the gameplay of various traditional games and how to pretend to be an adult. In addition to these skills, the physical and spiritual strength of the 5 people were also superimposed on Hugo. Under this circumstance, Hugo could feel that his physical body and soul's strength had all exceeded that of normal humans, and he had begun to take an important step towards becoming an ancient god admiral. "My admiral, You look very good now, Hood said with a smile after Hugo finished adapting to his physical condition. Then, like Christmas, she took out several boxes and placed them in front of Hugo and said carefully, "During this time, we have collected another part of the media used to summon companions, so I think now is a good time to, of course, I may have to spend a month in the United States this time, so it's always a good thing to summon some companions sooner," Hugo said immediately as he stepped forward, checking the boxes. Unlike his previous life's vacation, Westerners often need more time for vacation, and a month's vacation at a time can be said to be relatively short. Considering that summoning a ship girl one day earlier would allow them to come to this world one day earlier, he was naturally happy to take this opportunity before going to the United States for vacation to complete this work. Where did these things come from this time? After checking all the boxes, Hugo asked, looking at the iron sheets and rivets in the boxes. "Did you go to a shipbreaking yard?" Chapter 97 Distribute. Although I don't want to admit it, these things were indeed obtained from some shipyards, Hood said after hearing Hugo's question. After all, the best medium for summoning shipgirls is a part of those warships. And you need to know that ordinary warships will undergo multiple overhauls or even modifications during their service, so these small parts on the warships are actually relatively easy for us to obtain. You did the right thing. In this matter, everything should be based on your convenience, Hugo nodded after listening to Hood's explanation, and then pointed to the boxes and asked. However, it's difficult for me to tell which ships they came from based on these small parts, so can you introduce them? Of course I can, Hood nodded and said. We have formulated a summoning list according to everyone's current needs, and what you see now are the ship girls on the first batch of the list. The parts you see now are all carefully selected by us. The only accident is that we didn't guess that you could get so many fate points at the end of the term. After you obtained more fate points, we also discussed it, and finally came to the conclusion that there is no need to change our list because of this. After all, after you summon your companions here, you will travel to Pearl Harbor in the United States, so we also have to leave you enough fate points to summon those American ship girls, Hood finally explained, and then began to introduce the ship girls to be summoned in a while. According to Hood, there will be a total of 10 ship girls summoned by Hugo in a while. They include the Renown and Repulse sisters, Unicorn, Shropshire, Illustrious, Indomitable, Formidable, Black Swan, Javelin, and Vampire. Although Vampire is a destroyer belonging to the Royal Australian Navy, Hood and the others still managed to find her parts in the UK because she used to be a destroyer of the Royal Navy. I thought you would let me summon all the ship girls of large ships, Hugo said after listening to Hood's introduction. I really didn't expect you to recommend destroyers like Black Swan and the others. Actually, I thought so at first, Hood smiled and said. But since summoning St. George last time, I realized that this world is different from the world we were originally in or the world you were in before. Magic will cause us to have some very unexpected changes. Of course, these changes are all good, and these changes are closely related to the content contained behind our names and some of the things we mastered as ship girls before. So, in order to further deploy in this world, we specially formulated this list after careful selection. You have really put in a lot of effort, Hugo said, bowing slightly to Hood to express his gratitude, and then began to use those mediums to summon these ship girls. A few minutes later, 10 ship girls of all sizes walked out of the light clusters generated during the summoning, and then, led by the Renown and Repulse sisters, gave Hugo a curtsy. Okay, everyone, please get up, Hugo said to the curtsying ship girls while bowing in return. Welcome to this world. I think you should already know the current situation through the Admiral network, right? I really need your help now. No problem, please leave everything to us, Renown, as the leader of this group of ship girls, said. Now that we are here, we will deal with both completing tasks and serving elegantly. Next, these ship girls began to be assigned tasks. Among them, Shropshire will go to Russia to join the Soviets to help them manage those plantations and farms. Because as a flower maid, she now possesses some special talents in the cultivation of various plants, including magical plants, so she can just help the Soviets. The others will stay in the UK, but everyone's tasks are different. Among them, Renown and Repulse will naturally follow Hood as her deputies to provide her with assistance. Since Belfast had her own things to deal with, Hood found that her workload had increased a lot. This increase in workload is due to two reasons. One reason is that although St. George, who came to fill the position later, has the ability to heal people's hearts, she is not very good at handling administrative affairs. On the other hand, with the passage of time, the scope of her forces has become larger and larger, so naturally there are more and more things to do. The remaining 7 ship girls will all infiltrate the magical world with the various identities assigned to them when they appeared in this world. For example, Illustrious and Unicorn will open a small clinic in Nocturne Alley. And Black Swan will also help out in this small clinic and be ready to carry out her assassin's mission at any time. Indomitable will appear in Hogsmeade as a magical tool maker, and Javelin will appear as his apprentice and bodyguard. If there are no accidents, she will soon be able to help Hugo and the others establish a stronghold in Hogsmeade, a town not far from Hogwarts Castle. Formidable, using the Bloodflower skin, will team up with Vampire to disguise themselves as a pair of vampire sisters, striving to integrate into the vampires of this world as soon as possible. After all, the vampires of this world are also a force not to be underestimated in the wizarding world. If preparations can be made in this regard as early as possible, it will definitely be a good thing. After the tasks were arranged, the 10 newly recruited ship girls collectively gave Hugo a military salute, and then, except for the 2 maid sisters, the other ship girls all left the building from the fire escape behind the house and rushed to their respective posts. Everyone is always so busy. We have to find a time to get together in the future, Hugo said after watching the ship girls leave in a hurry. It's really too hard for them to put them to work as soon as they come here. No, it's not hard for us at all. Renown lowered her head and looked at Hugo and said, because we know that what we are doing is very important to both you, Admiral, and everyone, and only through such efforts can we have enough time to rest and gather in the future. We should be very happy that so many companions have come to this world today. Sister, you should talk about some more relaxed topics, Repulse pouted and said, then bent down and looked at Hugo. But now the Admiral is actually such a small one. It's so cute. Repulse, maintain your state. A maid should not look at her master like that. Seeing this scene, Renown quickly pulled her sister, and then bowed slightly to Hugo and said, sorry, my Admiral Master, my sister is still slightly lacking in maid training. It's okay, it's okay. Hugo waved his hand with a smile and said, I'm not one of those old-fashioned people. It's best for everyone to maintain their daily state. There's no need to suppress yourself because of me. In the next period of time, Hugo immediately felt the benefits of the addition of these new ship girls. For example, during afternoon tea time this afternoon, he and his sister Hermione enjoyed a royal level perfect afternoon tea here. Chapter 98 set off. That day, Hugo and Hermione had a very pleasant time with Hood, because the 2 maids not only provided everyone with many delicious snacks, but also gave them a lot of new knowledge after joining their conversation, such as a series of tips on organizing housework at home. I think sisterhood must be a noble. On the way home, Hermione whispered excitedly to Hugo. The 2 maids who appeared today are so elegant in their gestures. They seem to be top maids cultivated by hereditary aristocratic families. I think so too, Hugo nodded and said, and to be honest, their cooking is really amazing. For example, the freshly baked Turkish-style snacks we ate when we had afternoon tea before, whether it was baklava or Turkish delight, the taste was simply wonderful. Early the next morning, Hugo and Hermione each dragged a suitcase and followed their parents in a taxi that had been specially booked by phone yesterday, heading straight to Heathrow Airport. After completing a series of preparations, they boarded an international passenger plane bound for the United States. According to the information on the ticket, the Grangers bought tickets for a direct flight from London to New York, but even so, the journey took a full 8 hours. Therefore, after getting off the plane and dealing with a series of matters, they walked out of New York's Kennedy International Airport and actually endured their sleepiness to get into a taxi to the hotel. Long-distance travel is not a comfortable thing for muggles or wizards. Compared with the kind of journey that takes a lot of time for muggles, the time spent by wizards in this kind of travel is much less. But whether it is the unpleasantness of the process or the money spent, there is no difference for muggles after all. There are not many wizards who can use apparition to cross such a long distance, and there are very few wealthy and powerful wizards who have various magical means of transportation for long-distance travel. Even fewer people can enjoy the instantaneous movement service provided by phoenixes. Therefore, for ordinary wizards who want to travel, there are only cross-national flu networks or certain legal portkeys to choose from. It's just that these two things have their own shortcomings among them. The cost of cross-national flu networks is relatively cheap, but there are not only few stations, but they are also very fixed. What's worse is that a trip like crossing the Atlantic may require people to turn around in the flu network for about half an hour. Therefore, for many people, Their bodies can hardly withstand such violent shaking as if they were in a washing machine. In contrast, portkeys are much faster. And you can also specify where you want to go next. But the shortcomings of this kind of travel are also obvious, that is, it is too expensive. For example, a trip like crossing the Atlantic may cost an ordinary Ministry of Magic employee about 2 months' salary. Therefore, many wizards would rather spend a little more time using Muggle travel methods when making such long-distance trips, especially after the advent of the Industrial Age. Although it is slower to do so, at least it is more comfortable during the journey, and the cost performance is also very high. For example, Nit's commander traveled from England to the United States on the most popular transatlantic cruise ship at that time. And the reason why he made such a choice is obviously related to the previous 2 reasons. Fortunately, the hotel booked by Mr. Granger was in downtown New York, so the car arrived at the hotel smoothly after only 20 or 30 minutes. However, just as they dragged their luggage into the family suite they had booked with a tired look, they found a young man wearing a windbreaker that was absolutely out of season standing in the suite. "Who are you?" Looking at the young man who appeared inexplicably in the room, Mr. Granger, the only adult male present, put down the package in his hand in front of the others, and then asked slightly nervously, "Also, why are you in our room now, sir? Please don't be excited, I have no malicious intent." The young man raised his hands to signal to the Granger family that he was not a threat, and then said, "My name is Mike Jensen, and I am an American wizard, belonging to the Wand Management Office of the American Magical Congress. Because there are 2 unregistered ones entering the country here, so I came to take a look. Father, I think you should be looking for us," Hugo said to his father, then looked at the young man in front of him and asked, "Can you tell us in detail what we should do? I think you should have found out that we come from a non-magical family, and we have only attended Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry for 1 year before. So I don't know much about some things in the wizarding world. Of course, this is a special law in our American magical world. It is normal for you little British wizards not to understand." Mike also relaxed at this time. He found that the 2 little wizards in front of him should really just not understand the situation here, and not the dangerous intruders he was worried about before he came. According to the laws of our American Magical Congress, all members of our American Magical Society, whether they are nationals or tourists, need to carry a wand permit, because in this way we can track all magical activities and identify perpetrators through wands. That is to say, in the United States, even adult wizards need to add a trace to their wands like our underage wizards in the United Kingdom. After listening to what the staff member of the American Magical Congress said, Hugo immediately reacted and said, "By the way, you know we are British. So if we leave the United States after the trip, will this monitoring of our wands still exist? Please rest assured, the registration magic used by you tourists is different from the registration magic used by our residents," the staff member of the American Magical Congress said. "This kind of registration magic will automatically disappear as long as you leave the country after completing the trip, and will definitely not continue to track you. It seems that the laws of wizards are also quite humane." After listening to this wizard's brief introduction to the American policy on wands, Mr. Granger said, and then he asked, "By the way, you just said that you want to register my children's wands at the American Magical Congress, so how should they get there? I think calling a taxi to take us there is enough." Mike shrugged. After all, for little wizards like them who are so young and have never been exposed to apparition, taking them to Apprit is obviously not a good idea. Plus, the Magical Congress is in New York. So I think we can use your Muggle means of transportation. Muggle, MRS. Granger asked curiously. "It has the same meaning as your British Muggle, referring to ordinary people who don't know magic." Mike shrugged. "Okay, let's go. This kind of registration work is better sooner than later." Chapter 99 MACUSA. The taxi departed from their hotel, crossed the Hudson River to Manhattan Island, and headed straight for the core financial district in the southern end of Manhattan Island. After experiencing several minor traffic jams, the taxi finally stopped on the famous Broadway. Across from their drop-off point were several skyscrapers built in the early 20th century. "This is it." After everyone got out of the car, Mike pointed to a Gothic-style building across the street, a style popular during the American Gilded Age, and said to Mr. Granger, who had accompanied them, "Please wait here. I'll accompany your children to complete this procedure. If there are no accidents, it shouldn't take more than half an hour." Soon, Mr. Granger found a place to sit in a nearby cafe and agreed on a meeting point with Hugo and Hermione after they were done. Then, He watched as the staff member from the Magical Congress of the United States led his children towards the Woolworth building across the street. This building looked very similar to the other buildings on this street, with countless white-collar workers in professional attire passing through a large revolving door. When Mike brought the Granger siblings here, he had them hold on to his hands, then made a slight turn and entered through a side door. While chanting a spell stepping through that door, Hugo was surprised to see the entire foyer transformed from the Woolworth building into the building of the Magical Congress of the United States of America under the influence of magic. Led by Mike, they walked up a wide staircase into the main hall, a magnificent and spacious area. Looking from the bottom up, it felt as if the entire building had been hollowed out, with sunlight streaming in from the windows on the wall surfaces, illuminating the entire hall. A magical machine that looked like a clock was located high above, with many gears and dials. The colored dials were engraved with words, magic exposure threat level. The green section indicated safe, 0 threat, followed by low threat, medium threat, high threat, unexplained serious situation, and the urgent highest level at this moment. The pointer of the magical clock pointed to low threat. Behind the clock was a daunting portrait, depicting a distinguished wizard, with a brass plate below engraved with the words, William Picquery, President of the Magical Congress. A large number of paper airplanes converged in the air above the hall, forming a torrent composed purely of paper airplanes. From time to time, paper airplanes joined this torrent from the surrounding corridors and offices, while a large number of paper airplanes broke away from this torrent and flew to other places below. These paper airplanes were a large group of busy male and female wizards. However, unlike Diagon Alley, the clothes worn by the male and female wizards here looked more like the styles of ordinary people outside, with only a small number of wizards wearing traditional wizard robes. It looked significantly more modern than the British wizarding world. We used to use owls, but you know that most living birds have the habit of defecating anywhere. Therefore, we had to spend a lot of time cleaning up owl droppings. So, after hearing that Britain had invented this small magic, the Magical Congress immediately replaced the original owls with this magic. As Mike spoke, he led them through a queue of wizards waiting for house elves to maintain their wands, and then walked to an old-fashioned but extremely beautiful wrought iron cage elevator, pressed a floor button, and said, all kinds of changes have been happening in the Magical Congress. Not only the owls outside, but even the elevators have changed. This elevator it seems a bit old. Hearing Mike say this, Hermione looked at the surrounding iron railings with some confusion. It should be from the same era as this building, right? Of course, the change I'm talking about doesn't mean that the elevator itself has changed. After hearing Hermione's words, Mike realized the loophole in his previous statement, so he added, but that this place used to have a goblin helping to press the elevator button, but this person was laid off during the reforms more than a decade ago. Honestly, I think this approach is right. Mike shrugged and said, why should we spend money hiring someone to press the button when a small copper plate nailed under the button can solve the problem? Hearing him say this, Hugo turned his head to look at the row of brass buttons next to the elevator door, and as expected, he found a small brass plate under each button, which clearly recorded what departments were on each floor corresponding to each button. The elevator descended rapidly underground. Although these magic-driven elevators were much faster than ordinary elevators, it took them a while to reach their destination because the offices of the Magical Congress of the United States were located very deep underground. Feels a bit strange? Victory's voice rang in Hugo's mind through the T-network at this time. Why are all the known ministries of magic built underground? The British Ministry of Magic, the Magical Congress of the United States, the French Ministry of Magic. What made them make the same choice? I think this may be from one of the most primitive ideas of mankind. Hugo raised his head, looked at the skylight above that had become a small square of light, thought for a moment, and said to Victory, you know, the earliest place for humans to hide was some caves, so when it comes to concealment, everyone subconsciously digs some caves as their hiding places. Wizards are still humans after all, so it's normal to have such thoughts. Just as they were talking, the elevator stopped and opened its doors. Then, Mike led Hugo and Hermione through a closed hall that resembled a cave. There were at least 100 typewriters in the hall, each typing documents with a clatter. After the documents were typed, they would automatically fold into a mouse and then climb along the transparent pipes above the typewriter to the offices above. This way, Mike said, leading Hugo and Hermione into a small corridor next to him. This corridor was much brighter than the room just now. A row of benches was placed against the wall on both sides of the corridor. At the end of the corridor was an office, and there was a machine made of gold and mahogany at the door of the office. Hugo and Hermione followed Mike through the corridor to the machine, and then Mike pulled the handle on the side of the machine. After pulling it twice in a row, 2 copper plates popped out of the opening below the machine. Each was printed with the Arabic numerals 06 and 07. Okay, you can listen for the staff in the office to call your number in a while. Whoever's number is called can take the plate and enter that office to complete the formalities. After you've registered, you two can go back the way you came and find your father, understand? Mike said, handing the 2 egg-sized copper plates to the Granger siblings. Now I have some other things to deal with and can't accompany you to finish things, understood? Hugo and Hermione nodded at the same time, then bowed and saluted. Also, thank you very much, Mr. Jensen. Chapter 100. Apply for a certificate. The wand registration process at the Magical Congress of the United States was quite efficient, so Hugo only had to wait a little over 10 minutes before hearing his number, 6, called to go in and register. After saying goodbye to his sister, Hugo stood up, walked through the corridor, and entered the office. At the end, the office wasn't very large. The most striking feature was the sizable desk in the center of the room, surrounded by several brass machines of unknown purpose. Besides that, several shelves lined the walls, piled high with files, both old and new. Sit, the MACUSA official sitting behind the desk instructed Hugo. Then, proceeding with routine, he said, nationality, name, gender, age, and reason for coming to America. Hugo Granger, British, male, 12 years old. Traveling to America with my sister and Muggle parents, Hugo replied, handing over his wand as requested. The official took the wand and placed it on a strange-looking brass machine to his left, resembling a single pan balance. As soon as the wand was placed on the machine, it began to vibrate slightly and emit clicking sounds. Then, a narrow strip of parchment shot out from a slot at the bottom. The MACUSA official, who had been writing on a piece of paper, looked up, tore off the parchment, and read aloud, 12 inches, lime wood, a dragon heartstring collar, used for 1 year. Correct, the ministry official, wearing a monocle and sporting curly, salt and pepper hair, looked up at Hugo. Lime wood wand, I don't think I've seen one of those in years. Yes, Hugo nodded, watching the official with curiosity. He was quite intrigued by the internal procedures of MACUSA and was eager to see what would happen next. I need to keep this slip, the official explained, perhaps noticing Hugo's young age and the curiosity in his eyes. This man, who looked to be in his 50s, added, it will be filed with the registration I just made for you. With that, the official took a stapler and attached the slip to the registration form he had just filled out. He then inserted it into a machine to his right that looked like a manual printing press. A few seconds later, a piece of parchment emerged from the bottom of the machine. All right, the laws in America are the same as in Britain. Minors are prohibited from performing magic outside of school, except in certain emergency situations, the ministry official said, using his wand to direct the newly stapled document onto a shelf beside him. Oh, and this, the official added, placing the parchment that had come out of the machine onto the table and stamping it twice before handing it to Hugo. Remember to carry this permit with you at all times while in the United States, otherwise, you will be considered to be illegally possessing a wand. Understood? Thank you, Hugo said, standing up and giving the official a slight bow. He then walked out of the office and returned to the waiting area to wait for Hermione to complete a registration. Fortunately, everything went smoothly, and 3 minutes later, they followed the same route back to the MACUSA lobby. After buying a few postcards for 2 sickles and mailing them to Harry and Ron, they left and rejoined their father back at the hotel. The 2 adults quickly retired to rest from the journey. Hugo and Hermione, perhaps due to their younger age, didn't feel as tired, so they pulled out a travel brochure and began discussing their upcoming itinerary. Although the main tourist destinations were unlikely to change when traveling with their parents, the Grangers were willing to accommodate their children's preferences on some of the finer details. Of course, given Hermione's personality, she had already discussed the travel destinations with Hugo before they even departed. What Hermione actually wanted to discuss with him now was a stack of free brochures she had picked up from the bookshelves while getting her wand permit. Like ordinary people, wizards also travel, even internationally. At the same time, wizards have access to some travel destinations that only they can visit. For example, during the summer holiday of Harry's second year, the Weasley family traveled to Egypt and visited some pyramids that were inaccessible to Muggles and only open to wizards. The United States was no exception. In fact, because of the country's vast size, It had even more tourist attractions exclusively for wizards than traditional European countries. Moreover, because there were more wizards here compared to the Mediterranean region, and a stronger commercial atmosphere, wizard travel agencies were even placing advertisements in the Macusa building. Of course, it had to be said that such advertising placement was indeed quite precise. Since those who came to apply for want permits were all foreigners who had just arrived in the country, they were more likely to be interested in travel-related advertisements than people elsewhere. Hawaii actually has 3 wizarding tourist attractions. I think we can visit all of them when we get there, Hermione said, picking out one of the brochures after flipping through the stack. As for tourist attractions in other places, forget it. America is really too big. We probably won't be able to go anywhere else this time. Let me see, Hugo said, taking the brochure from his sister's hand. Sure enough, besides describing the scenic spots in purple ink, the brochure also included several wizarding photographs of beautiful scenery. It had to be said that the coconut groves and beaches at sunset were indeed quite appealing. After briefly looking through the brochure, Hugo had a general understanding of the 3 locations and said, "This trip is much simpler than we thought, because Honolulu has a wizarding market. I think there should be transportation to the surrounding islands there." "You're right," Hermione, who was holding a map of Hawaii and a transportation map, realized after Hugo's reminder. She then put away the books in her hand. "Since this place is also a wizarding tourist destination, I don't think we need to worry about how to get there using Muggle methods. Although I heard from the older students that using the flu network can make you dizzy, I think it should be fine for short trips." For the next while, the 2 of them took out their homework and began to work on it. It wasn't until it was time for dinner that they put away their workbooks and went downstairs with their parents, who had recovered from their long journey, to have dinner. "Foreign food, huh?" Hermione revealed some of the liveliness that she should have at her age as they walked downstairs. "Let me guess what unfamiliar foods we'll have for dinner today." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.